In the shadowed halls of Ravenwood Manor, a cryptic letter lures Hercule Poirot into a deadly game orchestrated by the elusive A.C., a mastermind claiming to rival Agatha Christie herself. As guests vanish, poisons strike, and ghostly apparitions haunt the night, a priceless manuscript hides a secret that could ruin empires. Who is A.C.? What deadly scheme unfolds behind locked doors and hidden passages? With time running out, Poirot's little gray cells face their ultimate test in a web of deception where every guest is a suspect and every clue could be a trap. Will he unravel the truth before the raven flies, or fall victim to the deadliest plot of all? Chapter 1. The Cryptic Invitation. The rain fell in silver sheets across London, drumming a restless rhythm on the windows of Hercule Poirot's impeccably tidy apartment at Whitehaven Mansions. The little Belgian detective sat in his favorite armchair, a steaming cup of tisane cradled in his hands, its herbal aroma curling into the air. His mustache, waxed to perfection, twitched faintly as he studied the letter before him. It was no ordinary missive. The paper was thick, creamy, and embossed with a subtle cresta raven clutching a quill, its lines sharp and deliberate. The handwriting, elegant yet forceful, seemed to challenge him with every word. "Monsieur Poirot," it began, "your reputation as a solver of puzzles precedes you. A game awaits at Ravenwood Manor, one crafted by a mind as cunning as Christie herself. Join us, if you dare, for a gala where secrets are the currency and truth the prize. Saturday the 15th, at dusk. Anonymously yours, A.C." Poirot's gray eyes gleamed. The reference to Agatha Christie was no coincidence. His exploits, immortalized in her novels, had made him a legend. But this letter was more than flattery. It was a gauntlet thrown at his feet. The anonymity of A.C. intrigued him, as did the mention of a game. He sipped his tisane, his mind already dissecting the possibilities. A trap? A jest? Or something far more sinister? Whatever it was, Hercule Poirot was not one to decline a challenge to his little gray cells. He glanced at the clock 4:30. The gala was tomorrow, and Ravenwood Manor, a secluded estate in the Sussex countryside, was a 4-hour train ride away. There was little time to prepare, but Poirot thrived on such constraints. He rose, adjusting his tie with meticulous care, and summoned his valet, George, to arrange travel. "A small adventure, George," he said, his voice crisp with anticipation. "One does not refuse an invitation so provocant." The next evening, as the train rattled through mist-shrouded fields, Poirot reviewed the letter again. The crest nagged at him. It was unfamiliar, yet deliberate, as if it held a clue he had yet to decipher. He tucked the letter into his pocket and gazed out at the darkening landscape. Ravenwood Manor was notorious in certain circles, a place of faded grandeur where aristocrats once held lavish parties, now whispered to be a haunt for eccentrics and schemers. Its current owner, if the rumors were true, was a recluse who rarely appeared in public. "A.C.?" Poirot murmured, his fingers drumming lightly on his cane. "Who are you, mon ami?" The train deposited him at a desolate station, where a sleek black car awaited. The driver, a taciturn man with a scar above his left eyebrow, offered no name, only a curt nod. Poirot settled into the back seat, his sharp eyes noting the driver's nervous grip on the wheel. The road to Ravenwood wound through dense woods, the trees closing in like silent conspirators. At last, the manor emerged from the fog a sprawling Gothic pile, its turrets piercing the twilight sky. Lights glowed in the windows, promising warmth, but the air carried a chill that went beyond the autumn damp. The driver stopped at the grand entrance, where a butler in a pristine tailcoat greeted Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume?" The man said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Welcome to Ravenwood. The other guests are in the drawing room." And our host? Poirot asked, his tone light but probing. The butler's smile was thin. Our host will join us in due time. Please follow me. The entrance hall was a study in opulence. Marble floors gleamed under a chandelier dripping with crystals, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls. Poirot's eyes darted to a peculiar detail, a tapestry depicting a raven, its quill identical to the crest on the letter. He paused, tracing the stitching with a gloved finger. The threads were uneven, as if concealing something beneath. A message, perhaps? He filed the observation away, his mind already cataloging the manor's secrets. The drawing room was alive with chatter and the clink of glasses. A fire roared in the hearth, casting flickering shadows over a dozen guests, each as distinct as characters in a play. Poirot stood at the threshold, his presence unnoticed for a moment, allowing him to observe. A woman in a crimson gown laughed too loudly, her diamond necklace glinting with every gesture. A gaunt man in a tweed suit clutched a notebook, scribbling furiously. A young couple whispered in a corner, their eyes darting nervously. And at the center, a silver-haired gentleman held court, his voice booming with authority. The butler announced, Poirot, and all eyes turned to him. Monsieur Hercule Poirot, he said, bowing slightly. The room fell silent, then erupted in murmurs. Poirot smiled, his mustache curling upward. He was accustomed to such reactions. His fame preceded him. After all, the silver-haired man approached, extending a hand. Sir Reginald Voss, retired inspector, he said, his grip firm. Didn't expect to see you here, Poirot. Thought you'd retired to your cabbages. Non, Poirot replied, his accent a deliberate flourish. The cabbages, they are charming, but the mind, it craves a puzzle. And you, Sir Reginald? What brings you to this curious gathering? Voss chuckled, but his eyes were guarded. Same as you, I wager. A letter from this AC fellow. Sounded like a lark, but now I'm not so sure. Before Poirot could press further, the woman in crimson swept forward, her perfume sharp and floral. Monsieur Poirot, she exclaimed, her voice a theatrical purr. Lillian Harcourt, novelist. I've read all about your cases. Tell me, is it true you solved the Orient Express business? Poirot inclined his head. Madame, the truth is often more complex than the tale is. But yes, I have had certain successes. Lillian laughed, her eyes gleaming with something Poirot couldn't quite place admiration, or perhaps calculation. She gestured to the room. Quite the menagerie, isn't it? Writers, critics, a detective or two. All lured by this mysterious AC? What do you make of it? A game, perhaps, Poirot said, his tone neutral. But one must always ask, what are the stakes? The conversation was interrupted by a sharp cry from across the room. A young woman, pale and delicate, stood clutching a glass that had slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. It moved! She gasped, pointing to a portrait above the fireplace, a stern woman in Victorian dress, her eyes seeming to follow the room. Nonsense, Clara, the man beside her said, his voice sharp. He was tall, with a poet's disheveled hair and a scowl. It's just a painting. Poirot approached, his curiosity piqued. Mademoiselle, what did you see? He asked gently. Clara, trembling, met his gaze. The eyes, they blinked. I swear it. The room tittered, but Poirot's expression remained grave. He stepped closer to the portrait, noting its heavy frame and the faint dust on its surface. His fingers brushed the edge, and he felt a slight vibration, almost imperceptible. Curio, he murmured. Turning to the guests, he said, Perhaps. Mademoiselle is not mistaken. The eyes of Ravenwood, they watch us closely, non? The tension broke as a gong sounded, summoning the guests to dinner. Poirot lingered, his gaze returning to the portrait. The vibration suggested a mechanism perhaps, a hidden camera, or a trick of light. He made a mental note to investigate. Later, but for now, the dining room beckoned. The table was a vision of grandeur, silver candelabras, crystal goblets, and a centerpiece of black roses, their petals unnervingly lifelike. Poirot took his seat, flanked by Lillian Harcourt, and a quiet man introduced as Dr. Elias Thorne, a literary scholar with a penchant for rare manuscripts. Across the table, Sir Reginald engaged a dour critic named Mortimer Blake in a heated debate about detective fiction. Clara, still shaken, sat beside her companion, the poet Julian Marsh, who seemed more interested in his wine than her distress. The first course, a veloute of chestnut and truffle, was served, and Poirot used the moment to observe his fellow guests. Each was a piece in the puzzle, their motives obscured by smiles and small talk. Lillian leaned close, her voice low. "They say Ravenwood is cursed," she whispered. "A writer disappeared here years ago, working on a novel that was never found. Do you think S.C. knows about it?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Madame, I think S.C. knows many things. But what they choose to reveal, that is the question." As the meal progressed, Poirot noticed subtle oddities. The butler, impeccable in his duties, avoided eye contact. The black roses seemed to shift slightly when no one was looking. And then there was the tapestry, visible through the dining rooms. Arched doorway, its raven motif glowing faintly in the candlelight. He excused himself, claiming a need for fresh air, and slipped into the entrance hall. The tapestry was heavier than it looked, its edges frayed but deliberate. Poirot lifted it carefully, revealing a panel of wood with a faint seam. He pressed gently, and the panel clicked, sliding open to reveal a narrow recess. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded and sealed with the same raven and quill crest. His heart quickened as he broke the seal, reading the words scrawled in the same bold hand as the invitation. "Welcome, Monsieur Poirot. The game begins. Find the truth before the raven flies, or all will be lost. A.K." Poirot folded the note, his mind racing. The message confirmed his suspicions. This was no mere gala, but a meticulously planned challenge, perhaps a trap. The reference to the raven suggested a time limit, a deadline tied to the manor's secrets. He replaced the panel and returned to the dining room, his demeanor unruffled, but his senses heightened. Dessert was served, a delicate mousse au chocolate, but the atmosphere had shifted. Clara's earlier outburst had unsettled the guests, and whispers of the manor's curse circulated. Sir Reginald, ever the skeptic, dismissed the tailies, but even he glanced at the portrait above the fireplace. Poirot, silent, watched the interplay of fear and bravado, knowing the night was far from overdought as the guests retired to the drawing-room for coffee. Poirot lingered at the table, his eyes on the black roses. He plucked one, examining its petals. They were real, yet coated in a faint, waxy substance that left a residue on his glove. A scent, almost imperceptible, clung to it, not floral, but chemical. Poison? A warning? He tucked the rose into his pocket, resolved to analyze it later. The evening drew to a close, and the guests were shown to their rooms. Poirot's was a luxurious suite, its walls adorned with more raven motifs. As he prepared for bed, he placed the mysterious note on his bedside table, its words echoing in his mind. The game had begun, and Hercule Poirot was its most dangerous player. He extinguished the lamp, but sleep did not come easily. The manor was alive with secrets, and he would uncover them all. The chapter closed with Poirot staring into the darkness, his little gray cells alight with the thrill of the chase. Tomorrow he would begin in earnest, but tonight he savored the opening move of a game that promised to test his genius like never before. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Host, The grand hall of Ravenwood Manor shimmered under the glow of a dozen crystal chandeliers, their prisms scattering light across the polished oak floors. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax candles and the faint, musky perfume of wealth. Hercule Poirot stood near a towering marble fireplace, his small, precise frame dwarfed by the opulence around him. His sharp eyes, however, missed nothing, neither the gleam of a guest's cufflink nor the fleeting glance of unease that passed between two strangers across the room. The gala had begun, but the host, known only as AC, was conspicuously absent. Poirot adjusted his impeccable bow tie, his mustache twitching as he surveyed the gathering. The cryptic invitation, penned in an elegant hand, had promised a night of intrigue, and already the air buzzed with it. The guests, 20 in all, were a curious mix: a retired Scotland Yard inspector with a penchant for whiskey, a reclusive heiress draped in emerald silk, a pair of rival novelists whose barbed pleasantries barely concealed their mutual disdain, and a young journalist whose nervous energy suggested he knew more than he let on. Each carried an air of secrecy, as if the manor itself had drawn them into its game. The evening had begun with a lavish banquet, a table groaning under platters of roasted pheasant, glazed figs, and decanters of ruby red wine. Conversation flowed, though it was laced with an undercurrent of tension. Poirot, seated between the heiress, Lady Beatrice Vane, and the journalist Oliver Crane, listened more than he spoke. Lady Beatrice's laughter was too bright, her fingers too quick to toy with the pearl choker at her throat. Crane, meanwhile, scribbled notes in a leather-bound journal, his eyes darting toward the empty chair at the head of the table. "Where is our mysterious host?" Lady Beatrice asked, her voice a practiced drawl. This AC promised a spectacle, yet they leave us to dine alone. It's rather theatrical, don't you think, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot inclined his head, his smile polite but guarded. Theatrical, oui, but deliberate, I suspect. The absence of the host is itself a performance, non? A prelude to something more. Crane paused his scribbling, his pen hovering. You think it's a game? Some kind of stunt to stir up gossip for the papers? Poirot's eyes gleamed. A game, perhaps, but not for the papers, Monsieur Crane. The mind behind this invitation is too clever for mere publicity. There is purpose here, hidden in plain sight. Before Crane could press further, a piercing scream shattered the murmur of the hall. Glasses clinked as guests startled, heads swiveling toward the source. At the far end of the room, near a set of oak-paneled doors, stood Miss Clara Duval, a young actress known for her melodramatic roles. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she pointed toward the corridor beyond. There's something in the study, she gasped, her voice carrying the trained cadence of the stage. I saw it a shadow, a struggle. The door's locked, but I swear someone's in there. The guests erupted into a flurry of whispers and hurried footsteps. Poirot, moving with surprising agility for a man of his stature, reached Miss Duval first. Calm yourself, mademoiselle, he said, his tone steady. What precisely did? You see? Clara's eyes were wide, her breath uneven. I was looking for the powder room when I passed the study. The door was ajar, and I heard a thump, like something heavy falling. Then a shadow moved inside. Someone was there? I'm sure of it. But when I tried the handle, it was locked. Poirot's gaze flicked to the corridor, where a crowd was already gathering. Show me, s'il vous plaît. The study was at the end of a dimly lit hallway, its heavy door carved with intricate vines and ravens. Poirot tested the handle himself locked. As Clara had said, he pressed his ear to the wood, hearing nothing but the faint creak of the manor settling. The guests hovered behind him, their faces a mix of curiosity and dread. Someone must have a key, growled Inspector Harold Grayson, the retired detective, his ruddy cheeks flushed from the wine. This is nonsense. Break the door down if we must. Non, Poirot said, raising a hand. To break is to destroy evidence. Patience, Inspector. The truth reveals itself to those who observe. He knelt, examining the lock. It was old but sturdy, a brass mechanism that showed no signs of tampering. His fingers traced the doorframe, pausing at a faint scratch near the hinges. Curio, he murmured, then stood, addressing the group. Monsieur Crane, you are a journalist, oui? You have perhaps a tool for such situations? Crane blinked, caught off guard. Well, I carry a penknife, for sharpening pencils, mostly. Excellent. May I borrow it? Crane handed over a small, silver-handled knife, and Poirot set to work. With deft movements, he probed the lock, his face a mask of concentration. After a moment, a soft click echoed in the silence, and the door swung inward. The study was a scene of controlled chaos. Books lay scattered across a mahogany desk, their pages splayed as if caught in a sudden wind. A crystal decanter had shattered on the floor, its amber contents pooling among the shards. A velvet curtain swayed near an open window, letting in a chill breeze. Most striking, however, was the absence of any occupant, no host, no shadow. No sign of the struggle Clara had described. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered, stepping inside. His eyes swept the room, cataloging every detail. The overturned chair, the smudged ink on a blotter, the faint scent of tobacco lingering in the air. He crossed to the window, noting the undisturbed dust on the sill. No one has climbed out this way, he said, half to himself. The dust is untouched. Grayson pushed past him, peering into the corners. Then where's the blasted host? People don't just vanish. Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. Do they not, Inspector? In the stories of Madame Christie, vanishing is an art form. But this is no story. This is a puzzle. He moved to the desk, where a single sheet of paper caught his eye. It bore a handwritten note, the ink still fresh. The game begins where the raven hides. Poirot's fingers hovered over the words, his mind racing. The raven a motif repeated in the manor's decor, from the carvings on the door to the tapestries in the hall. He turned, his gaze settling on a towering bookshelf that spanned the far wall. Madame Vane, he called, beckoning the heiress forward. You are a woman of taste, oui? Tell me, what do you see in this bookshelf? Lady Beatrice stepped closer, her emerald gown catching the candlelight. She studied the shelves, her brow furrowing. It's beautiful, I suppose. Antique oak, hand-carved. The books are rare first editions, some of them. But why? Her words cut off, as Poirot's hand darted out, pressing a carved raven embedded in the shelf's trim. A low groan echoed through the room, and the bookshelf shuddered, sliding inward to reveal a narrow passage. The guests gasped, stepping back as a gust of stale air wafted from the darkness. A secret passage, Crane whispered, his journalist's instincts kicking in. He fumbled for his notebook, scribbling furiously. Poirot peered into the passage, his expression unreadable. The walls were stone, damp and moss-slick, descending into shadow. This, he said softly, is where our host is gone. Or perhaps, where they wish us to go. Are you mad? Grayson snapped. You're not seriously going in there? Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming with determination. Mais oui, Inspector. The truth lies in the shadows, and Hercule Poirot does not shy from them. But first, we must secure this room. No one enters without my permission. He gestured to two footmen who had followed the crowd, their faces pale. Guard this door. Let no one pass. Then, addressing the guests, he added, Return to the hall, Mies Hamus. The gala continues, but the game has only begun. As the guests shuffled back, whispering among themselves, Poirot lingered in the study. He knelt by the shattered decanter, dipping a finger into the spilled liquid and sniffing it. Whiskey, but laced with something bitter almonds, perhaps. His mind catalogued the detail, filing it alongside the note, the passage, and the raven motif. The host's disappearance was no accident. It was a carefully staged act, designed to unsettle and provoke. Back in the hall, the mood had shifted. The music, once lively, now felt hollow, the violinist's bow scraping out a mournful tune. Clara Duval sat in a corner, clutching a glass. Of water, her earlier theatrics replaced by genuine fear. Lady Beatrice circulated among the guests, her laughter a touch too forced. Crane hovered near Poirot, his pen still scratching. "What do you make of it, Monsieur Poirot?" he asked, his voice low. "This Acide, are they hiding, or something worse?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Hiding, perhaps, but not for the reasons you think. The note speaks of a raven, a symbol of mystery and cunning. Our host wishes us to play their game, to follow their clues. But Hercule Poirot does not follow. Blindly, he glanced at the guests, noting their interactions. The rival novelists, Evelyn Marsh and Thomas Blackwood, stood apart, their earlier banter replaced by cold silence. Evelyn, a sharp-eyed woman with a penchant for Gothic tailies, clutched a cigarette holder, her fingers trembling slightly. Blackwood, a burly man whose detective novels rivaled Christie's in popularity, stared at the chandelier, his jaw tight. Across the room, a quiet figure caught Poirot's eye, a man introduced as Dr. Felix Moreau, a botanist with a reserved demeanor. His hands, Poirot noted, bore faint green stains, as if he'd been handling plants. "Tell me, Monsieur Crane," Poirot said, his voice casual. "What do you know of our fellow guests? You journalists, you have the nose for secrets, non?" Crane hesitated, then leaned closer. "Well, I've heard rumors. Lady Beatrice inherited her fortune under questionable circumstances. Her late husband's death was ruled an accident, but some say she had a hand in it. Grayson, the inspector, was forced into retirement after botching a high-profile case, something about a missing heiress. As for the novelists, Marsh and Blackwood, they've been at each other's throats for years. Rumor has it Blackwood stole one of Marsh's ideas, and she's never forgiven him." "And Dr. Moreau?" Poirot prompted, his eyes fixed on the botanist. Crane frowned. "Not much on him. Keeps to himself, mostly. Specializes in rare plants, I think. Why, do you suspect him?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "I suspect everyone, Monsieur Crane, until the truth reveals itself. Now, if you will excuse me, I must think." He stepped away, finding a quiet corner near a stained glass window depicting a raven in flight. The manor was a labyrinth of secrets, each guest a potential player in a sea's game. The hidden passage, the note, the stage struggle all pointed to a mind as meticulous as it was devious. But why? To what end? As the clock struck 11, a new disturbance rippled through the hall. Clara Duval stood again, her voice trembling. "I saw it again, the shadow. It was in the corridor, moving toward the greenhouse." The guests stirred, but Poirot raised a hand, his voice cutting through the panic. "Enough, mademoiselle. There is no shadow, only the tricks of a clever mind. Return to your seats, all of you. Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth." He moved toward the corridor, his steps purposeful. The greenhouse lay at the far end of the manor, its glass walls glinting in the moonlight. If the shadow was real, it was no ghost, it was a clue, another piece of the puzzle. As he walked, he recalled the bitter scent of the whiskey, the green stains on Moreau's hands, the raven's cryptic message. The host had vanished, but they had left a trail, and Poirot would follow it. The chapter closed with him standing at the greenhouse door, his hand on the handle, his little gray cells alight with possibilities. The game was afoot, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until he had unmasked the vanishing host. Chapter 3. The riddle in the library, the air in Ravenwood Manor was thick with suspicion, the kind that clung to the velvet drapes and seeped into the polished mahogany floors. Hercule Poirot stood at the threshold of the secret passage he had discovered behind the study's bookshelf, his keen eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor that stretched into darkness. The passage was narrow, its stone walls damp and cool, exuding an ancient musk that suggested secrets long buried. The guests, still reeling from the host's vanishing act, murmured anxiously in the grand hall, their voices a low hum of distrust. Poirot, however, was not swayed by the collective unease. His little gray cells were already at work, piecing together the puzzle that had begun with the cryptic invitation. He adjusted his impeccable mustache, a ritual that steadied his thoughts, and stepped into the passage. The faint glow of a single oil lamp, left burning by some unseen hand, cast flickering shadows on the walls. His polished shoes clicked softly against the stone, a metronome to his racing mind. The letter from A.C. had promised a game as cunning as Christie herself, and the hidden message in the manor's decor, a subtle arrangement of roses in a vase, their stems forming the shape of a quill, had confirmed his suspicion. This was no ordinary gala. It was a stage, and Poirot was determined to unmask the director. The passage sloped downward, its walls narrowing until Poirot's shoulders nearly brushed the stone. At its end, a heavy oak door loomed, its surface carved, with intricate vines that seemed to writhe in the lamplight. He tested the handle, expecting resistance, but it yielded with a soft creak. Beyond lay a room that took his breath away, not for its grandeur, but for its secrets. The hidden library was a cavern of knowledge, its walls lined with shelves that stretched to a vaulted ceiling. Leather-bound tomes, their spines embossed with gold, stood shoulder to shoulder with manuscripts yellowed by time. A single chandelier, its candles unlit, hung like a silent sentinel above a long table cluttered with papers, inkwells, and a peculiar brass astrolabe. The air smelled of old parchment and wax, a scent that stirred Poirot's senses. This was no mere collection of books. It was a shrine to the written word, and somewhere within it lay the key to a seized game. Poirot's eyes darted to the table, where a single volume stood out, a slim black journal, its cover unadorned save for the initials A.C., embossed in silver. He approached cautiously, his fingers brushing the leather as if it might bite. The journal was locked, its clasp intricate, but not impenetrable. From his pocket, Poirot produced a small set of tools discreet, yet indispensable for a detective. Of his caliber, with a deft twist, the clasp gave way, and the pages fell open. The journal was a labyrinth of words, written in a meticulous hand that danced between elegance and obsession. Passages described a perfect crime, a scheme so intricate it could only be the work of a mind both brilliant and unhinged. The text was interspersed with cryptic symbol circles bisected by lines, stars within triangles, and phrases in Latin that Poirot recognized as ciphers. One passage caught his eye. The quill is mightier than the sword, but only when wielded by the hand that knows its weight. Below it, a riddle. In shadows deep, where secrets sleep, a name is carved. Where none shall weep doth seat the spine that holds the tale, where truth and lies in balance scale. Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. A riddle, of course. A.C. was playing a game within a game, daring him to unravel it. He closed the journal, slipping it into his coat for safekeeping, and turned his attention to the shelves. The riddle's mention of a spine suggested a book, and the library held thousands. But Poirot was not one to be daunted by volume. He began to scan the shelves, his fingers trailing lightly over the bindings. Searching for an anomaly. As he worked, the door to the library creaked open, and footsteps echoed behind him. Poirot did not turn. His ears were as sharp as his eyes. The cadence of the steps, hesitant yet deliberate, belonged to someone accustomed to moving unnoticed. "Monsieur," he said without looking, "it is impolite to interrupt a man in thought." A soft chuckle followed, and the woman's voice replied, "I didn't expect to find you here, Monsieur Poirot. This place feels like a tomb." He turned to face Eleanor Vane, the cryptic heiress he had noted at the gala. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon, but her eyes, sharp and searching, betrayed a mind far less composed. She wore a silk gown the color of midnight, its hem brushing the floor as she stepped closer. "I couldn't sleep," she sighed, her tone casual but her posture tense. "The others are whispering about the host's disappearance. They think you know more than you're saying." Poirot tilted his head, studying her. "And you, Mademoiselle Vane? What do you think?" She smiled, a flicker of defiance in her gaze. "I think you're here for the same reason I am. This manor is full of secrets, and that journal," she nodded toward his coat, "is the key to one of them." Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his mind raced. Eleanor was observant, perhaps too observant. "The journal," he said, "is merely a curiosity. But you, mademoiselle, seem to know this manor well. Tell me, have you visited before?" Her smile faltered just for a moment. "Never, but I've read about it. Ravenwood has a reputation haunted, some say, a perfect setting for a mystery." "Or a crime," Poirot countered, his voice soft but pointed. "Come, let us return to the others. It is not safe to wander alone." They retraced their steps through the passage, emerging into the study where the guests had gathered. The atmosphere was taut, like a violin string ready to snap. Sir Reginald Holt, a retired detective with a penchant for brandy, was pacing by the fireplace, his florid face flushed with agitation. "This is madness," he barked. "Our host vanishes, and now we're locked in this blasted place, like rats in a trap." "Calm yourself, Sir Reginald," said Clara Duval, a rival author whose sharp tongue matched her sharper pen. She lounged in an armchair, a glass of wine in hand, her dark eyes scanning the room. "If anyone's to blame, it's the one who invited us here. And I'd wager Poirot knows more than he's letting on." All eyes turned to Poirot, who stood at the center of the room, unruffled. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice smooth as velvet, "I know only that we are part of a game designed by one who calls themselves AC. The journal I have found confirms this. It speaks of a perfect crime, but it is not the crime itself. That interests me. It is the motive." "Motive?" scoffed Lionel Gray, a young playwright with a nervous tic. "What motive could anyone have to drag us here and play these tricks?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That, Monsieur Gray, is what we shall discover. But first, I require your assistance. Each of you has a past, a story that brought you to Ravenwood. Tell me, and do not lie, for Hercule Poirot sees all." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, but Poirot's presence was commanding. One by one, they spoke. Sir Reginald admitted to a rivalry with a mysterious author whose work had overshadowed his own. Clara revealed a plagiarism scandal that had nearly ruined her career, hinting at a grudge against an unnamed figure. Lionel confessed to a failed play, its funding pulled by an anonymous investor. Eleanor, however, was cagey, speaking only of her late father's connection to rare manuscripts, a connection that made Poirot's ears prick as the confessions unfolded. Poirot's mind returned to the riddle. A name's carved where none shall weep. The words suggested a hidden marker, perhaps a literal carving. He excused himself, claiming a need for air, and slipped back to the library alone. The guests' stories had given him a thread to pull, and he suspected the answer lay in the shelves, back in the library. He focused on the section nearest the astrolabe, its brass gleaming under the lamplight. The riddle's mention of a spine and a tail pointed to a specific book. He ran his fingers along the bindings, searching for anything out of place. At last, he found it a thin volume titled The Scales of Truth, its spine slightly worn, as if frequently handled. He pulled it free, and a soft click echoed through the room. A panel in the shelf slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, its edges frayed. Scrawled in the same meticulous hand as the journal was a name, Eleanor Vane. Below it, a list of dates and events publishings, scandals, and a cryptic note. She who holds the quill controls the narrative. Poirot's heart quickened. Eleanor's story about her father's manuscripts was no coincidence. She was tied to a seized scheme, but how? Was she a pawn, a conspirator, or something else entirely? He tucked the parchment into his coat, beside the journal, and locked the compartment. The riddle had pointed him to Eleanor, but the game was far from over. He returned to the guests, who were now huddled in small groups, whispering. Eleanor met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Find anything interesting, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her voice light but her eyes wary. "Only the beginnings of truth," he replied, his tone equally light. "But truths, mademoiselle, have a way of multiplying." The night stretched on, the manor's walls seeming to close in. Poirot knew the journal held more secrets, but he could not risk exposing it yet. He locked it in a drawer in the study, its key safely in his pocket, and announced his intention to retire for the night. The guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. Alone in his room, Poirot sat at a small desk, a journal open before him. The ciphered passages taunted him, their symbols a code he had yet to crack. But the riddle had given him a start, and Eleanor Vane was now a focal point. Was she AC, or merely a piece in their game? The answer, he knew, lay in the days ahead. As the clock struck midnight, a distant thud echoed through the manor, followed by a faint cry. Poirot rose, his senses alert. The game was escalating, and he would not be caught unprepared. With the journal secured and the parchment's secrets burning in his mind, he stepped into the corridor, ready to face whatever AC had planned next. Chapter 4. The Poisoned Chalice. The dining hall of Ravenwood Manor gleamed under the flicker of a dozen candelabras, their flames casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. The air was thick with the scent of roasted pheasant herbed, potatoes, and an undercurrent of suspicion that clung to the guests like damp fog. Hercule Poirot sat at the far end, his sharp eyes darting from face to face, cataloging every gesture, every flicker of unease. The gala, meant to be a celebration of literary brilliance, had taken a darker turn since the host's vanishing act the previous night. Now, with the discovery of the concealed passage and the coded journal signed AC, the atmosphere was taut as a bowstring. The guests, an eclectic mix of literary luminaries and enigmatic figures, were seated in a wary circle. To Poirot's left was Evelyn Hart, a sharp-tongued novelist whose Gothic tales had earned her a fortune but few friends. Her emerald earrings glinted as she leaned forward, her voice cutting through the murmur. "This is absurd. We're all sitting here, pretending to dine, while our so-called host plays games with us. I say we leave this cursed place at dawn." Across the table, Sir Reginald Voss, a retired Scotland Yard detective with a penchant for brandy and boasting, snorted. "Leave? And miss the chance to solve a mystery before the great Hercule Poirot? Not likely, madam." His jowls quivered as he raised his chalice, the silver rim catching the candlelight. Beside him, Clara Beaumont, the cryptic heiress whose wealth was rumored to rival the crown's, toyed with her napkin, her pale fingers trembling slightly. "Perhaps the host is testing us," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "A game of wits, like one of my novels." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A game, Mademoiselle Beaumont? Oui, but one with stakes far higher than mere amusement." His gaze lingered on her, noting the faint flush creeping up her neck. She knew something, he was certain, but what? The meal progressed in uneasy silence, broken only by the clink of cutlery and the occasional forced laugh. Poirot sipped his wine, a fine Bordeaux, but his attention was elsewhere. The hidden message he'd spotted in the manor's decor last night, a series of carved ravens in the paneling, each with a tiny letter etched into its wing, had spelled out a warning: beware the chalice. He had dismissed it as a decorative quirk at first, but now, as the servants cleared the plates and refilled the silver chalices with a ruby-red dessert wine, the words gnawed at him. He leaned back, observing the room. The servants moved with practiced grace, their faces impassive, but one, a young man with a scar above his left eyebrow, seemed to linger near Evelyn Hart's seat. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The man's hands, when he poured the wine, were steady, but his glance darted toward the chandelier above, as if expecting it to fall. "Mes amis," Poirot said, rising to his feet, his voice smooth but commanding. "A toast, if I may, to the ingenuity of our absent host, who has brought us together for a purpose yet to be revealed." He raised his chalice, watching as the others followed suit, some reluctantly. Evelyn Hart rolled her eyes but complied, while Sir Reginald drained his glass in one gulp, smacking his lips. Clara Beaumont hesitated, her chalice hovering near her lips. Poirot's heart quickened. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "is the wine not to your liking?" She froze, her eyes meeting his. "It's fine," she said, but her hand shook, and a droplet of wine spilled onto the tablecloth, blooming like blood. Before Poirot could press further, a choked gasp shattered the moment. Sir Reginald Voss lurched forward, his chalice clattering to the table. His face turned a sickly shade of purple, his hands clawing at his throat. "Poison," he rasped before collapsing onto the floor, his body convulsing. Screams erupted. Evelyn Hart leapt to her feet, knocking over her chair, while Clara Beaumont dropped her chalice, the wine pooling on the table. The other guests, Dr. Felix Mortimer, a chemist with a nervous tic, Lydia Crane, a playwright with a penchant for melodrama, and Julian Pierce, a young poet with haunted eyes, froze in their seats, their faces a gallery of shock and fear. Poirot sprang into action, kneeling beside Sir Reginald. He pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck, feeling for a pulse. It was faint, erratic. Quickly, he barked at the nearest servant. "Fetch water and a physician, if one is among us." His mind raced, cataloging the symptoms: labored breathing, dilated pupils, the faint scent of almonds on the man's breath. Cyanide or something close. Dr. Mortimer, recovering from his stupor, hurried to Poirot's side. "Let me see," he said, his voice trembling. He examined Sir Reginald, his fingers probing the man's mouth and neck. "It's a toxin, no doubt, possibly prussic acid. But how?" Poirot's gaze snapped to the fallen chalice. The silver gleamed, but a faint residue clung to its inner rim, a powdery film invisible to the untrained eye. He stood, his voice cutting through the chaos. "No one is to leave this room. The chalice of Sir Reginald was tampered with, and the poisoner is among us." The guests erupted in protests. "This is outrageous." Evelyn Hart snapped. "You can't accuse us without proof." "Proof, Madame Hart?" Poirot's eyes glinted. "I shall have it, rest assured. But first, we must ensure no further harm comes to us." He turned to the servants, who hovered near the door, their faces pale. "You, with the scar," he said, pointing to the young man he'd noticed earlier. "What is your name?" The servant flinched. "Thomas, sir. Thomas, you poured the wine. Did you notice anything unusual? The man's eyes darted too. The floor. No, sir. I just did my job. Poirot's mustache twitched again. A lie, perhaps, but not the whole truth. He filed it away, turning his attention to the table. The chalices, identical in design, were engraved with intricate raven motifs matching the manor's decor. He lifted Sir Reginald's chalice, careful not to touch the rim, and sniffed it. The almond-like scent was unmistakable. "Dr. Mortimer," Poirot said, "you are a chemist. Tell me, where might one procure such a poison in a place like this?" Mortimer blinked, his tic worsening. "Prussic acid? It's rare, but certain plants can produce cyanogenic compounds. There's a greenhouse on the estate, isn't there? Some species, like bitter almonds or certain laurels, could be distilled into a toxin." Poirot nodded, his mind already racing toward the greenhouse. "Merci, doctor. You have been most helpful." He turned to the guests, his voice firm. "We shall adjourn to the drawing-room. The dining hall is now a crime scene, and I, Hercule Poirot, will not rest until the poisoner is unmasked." The guests filed out, their whispers a cacophony of fear and accusation. Poirot lingered, his eyes scanning the room. The carved ravens in the paneling seemed to watch him, their etched letters a silent taunt. He approached the nearest one, running his finger over the carving. The warning, "Beware the chalice," had been no coincidence. Whoever had placed it knew the poison was coming. The greenhouse stood at the edge of the manor's grounds, its glass walls misted with condensation. Poirot entered alone, the humid air heavy with the scent of earth and blooms. Moonlight filtered through the panes, cast in eerie patterns on the stone floor. Rows of plants stretched before him, roses, orchids, and more exotic specimens, their leaves glistening in the dim light. He moved methodically, his polished shoes silent on the tiles. Dr. Mortimer's mention of cyanogenic plants had been a clue, and Poirot was certain the answer lay here. He examined the labels on the pots, his fingers brushing against leaves as he searched for the telltale signs. Near the back, tucked behind a cluster of ferns, he found it, a small shrub with glossy leaves and a label reading Prunus laurocerasus cherry laurel, a known source of cyanogenic glycosides. Poirot knelt, inspecting the plant. Several leaves were missing, their stems cleanly cut as if harvested recently. He found a small vial hidden in the soil, its contents a clear liquid with a faint almond scent. He pocketed it, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The poisoner had access to the greenhouse, knowledge of botany, and the opportunity to tamper with the chalice. But who? As he stood, a shadow moved at the edge of his vision. He spun, his hand on his cane, but the greenhouse was empty. Or so it seemed. A faint creak came from the far door, and Poirot's pulse quickened. He moved toward it, his senses alert, but found only a breeze rustling the leaves. Yet the feeling of being watched lingered, a prickling at the base of his neck. Back in the drawing-room, the guests were restless. Evelyn hard-paced, her emerald earrings flashing with each step. "This is intolerable," she said. "First the host disappears. Now Sir Reginald is poisoned, and we're all suspects? I won't stand for it." "Calm yourself, madame," Poirot said, entering the room. "Panic serves only the guilty." He held up the vial from the greenhouse, its contents glinting in the firelight. "This, Ms. Amos, is the source of the poison, a distillate from the cherry laurel, prepared with care and precision. Only someone with knowledge of this manor's secrets could have crafted it." Clara Beaumont gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You can't think one of us?" "Oui, mademoiselle. One among you is not what they seem." Poirot's eyes swept the room, lingering on each face. Julian Pierce, the poet, sat slumped in a corner, his eyes red-rimmed. Lydia Crane clutched a glass of water, her knuckles white. Dr. Mortimer's tic had grown worse, his fingers twitching as he avoided Poirot's gaze. And Thomas, the servant, stood by the door, his scar stark against his pale skin. Poirot's mind churned. The poisoner had acted boldly, targeting Sir Reginald in front of everyone. But why him? The retired detective had been loud, rash, but seemingly harmless. Unless Poirot recalled a passing comment Sir Reginald had made during cocktails. "I've seen that face before, mark my words. AC isn't as clever as they think." Had he recognized someone or something that threatened the scheme? Before Poirot could pursue the thought, Clara Beaumont stood, her chalice in hand. I can't stay here," she said, her voice trembling. She raised the chalice to her lips, and Poirot's heart stopped. "None!" he shouted, lunging forward. He knocked the chalice from her hand, sending it crashing to the floor. The wine spilled, and there it was again, that faint almond scent. The room fell silent, all eyes on Poirot and Clara. "Mademoiselle," Poirot sighed, his voice low, "you are fortunate to be alive. That chalice was poisoned, just as Sir Reginald's was." Clara collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "I didn't know." "I swear." Poirot knelt beside her, his tone gentle but probing. "Tell me, Mademoiselle Beaumont, what do you know of the host of a sea?" Her eyes widened, and she shook her head. "Nothing. Only I heard a rumor. Before the gala, someone said a sea was planning a spectacle, something to outshine us all. I thought it was just talk." Poirot stood, his mind racing. The rumor was vague, but it confirmed his suspicion. AC was orchestrating a grand performance, with the guests as unwitting players. And the poisonings were no accident. They were part of the script. He turned to the group, his voice commanding. "Mies Amos, the poisoner has struck twice, but they have failed to claim a second victim. I, Hercule Poirot, swear to you, I will find the truth. But I need your help. If any of you know of a hidden safe in this manor, speak now." Lydia Crane hesitated, then raised her hand. I saw something. In the study, behind the portrait of the raven. There's a panel, and I think it hides a safe." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci, Madame Crane. You have given me the key to the next step." He turned to the servant, Thomas. "You will accompany me to the study. The rest of you remain here under Dr. Mortimer's watch. No one leaves." As Poirot left the room, Thomas trailing reluctantly behind, he felt the weight of the mystery pressing down. The safe, he was certain, held answers, perhaps the coded journal's secrets, or something more dangerous. The carved ravens seemed to follow him, their silent warning echoing in his mind, "Beware the chalice." But Poirot was no longer merely wary. He was determined, his little gray cells burning with the fire of justice. The study was dark, the air heavy with the scent of old books and wax. The portrait of the raven hung above the fireplace, its eyes seeming to glint with malice. Poirot approached, his fingers tracing the frame. A faint click, and the panel swung open, revealing a small safe. Its lock was intricate, but Poirot was no stranger to such challenges. He knelt, his tools already in hand, ready to unlock the next piece of Assie's deadly puzzle. Chapter 5. The Safe's Deadly Secret. The air in Ravenwood Manor hung thick with suspicion, the kind that clings to the walls like damp moss. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand dining hall, his sharp eyes scanning the guests as they murmured in. Uneasy clusters. The events of the previous evening, the poisoned chalice, the rare toxin, the greenhouse's sinister flora, had left everyone on edge. The absence of their mysterious host, known only as I see, loomed like a shadow, and Poirot knew the key to unraveling this intricate plot lay somewhere within the manor's labyrinthine secrets. He adjusted his impeccable bow tie, his mind already piecing together the puzzle. The coded journal he'd found in the hidden library had hinted at a deeper scheme, one that went beyond mere murder. The poisoning of Lord Reginald Hawthorne, a pompous novelist with a penchant for boasting about his unpublished masterpiece, had been no accident. The toxin, derived from the rare Aconitum napellus in the greenhouse, required knowledge and access qualities only a select few in this eclectic gathering possessed. But it was the safe, mentioned in a cryptic passage of the journal, that now beckoned Poirot like a siren's call. The heart of the manor guards the truth. The journal had read, its ink smudged as if written in haste. Within the iron vault, the scheme unfolds. Poirot's little gray cells buzzed with the certainty that this safe held the next piece of the puzzle. He had already deduced its likely location, the study where the host had vanished, behind the bookshelf that concealed the secret passage. But accessing it would require cunning, for the manor was alive with eyes and ears, and not all belonged to allies dot the hunt for the safe. The morning sun filtered through the manor's tall windows, casting long shadows across the oak-paneled study. Poirot stood alone, the door locked behind him to deter prying guests. The bookshelf, heavy with leather-bound tomes, loomed before him. He ran his fingers along the spines, searching for the telltale mechanism he'd noticed the night before. Slight indentation in the wood, barely perceptible to an untrained eye. His gloved hand pressed against it, and with a soft click, the shelf shuddered, revealing the narrow passage he'd explored previously. But this time, Poirot's destination was not the hidden library. He stepped into the passage, his polished shoes echoing faintly on the stone floor. The air was cool and musty, carrying the faint scent of old paper and wax. His flashlight, a compact silver device he always carried for such occasions, cast a narrow beam ahead. The journal had mentioned a guardian of secrets, and Poirot suspected this referred to the safe, concealed somewhere within the manor's inner sanctum. The passage twisted downward, leading to a small circular chamber lined with stone. At its center stood an iron safe, its surface etched with intricate filigree that seemed oddly out of place in the utilitarian space. The safe was old, its dial worn but functional, and a faint scratch near the lock suggested recent use. Poirot knelt, his eyes narrowing as he studied the mechanism. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "this is no ordinary vault. It is a challenge, a test of intellect." He produced a small notebook from his pocket, flipping to the page where he transcribed the journal's cryptic clues. The relevant passage read, "The numbers dance in threes, a waltz of fate. Begin with the year of the manor's birth, then have the sum of secrets." Poirot's brow furrowed. Ravenwood Manor, he had learned from a plaque in the hall, was built in 1872. But the sum of secrets? That required deeper thought. He paced the chamber, his mind racing. The journal had referenced secrets repeatedly, often tied to the guests themselves. There were 12 guests at the gala, including Poirot himself, though he excluded himself from suspicion, a reasonable assumption, given his role as the hunter, not the hunted. 11 secrets, then. But what did it mean? To sum them? He recalled the guests' introductions. Each had a motive, a hidden past, hinted at through veiled comments. Perhaps the secrets were not literal, but symbolic, tied to the number of letters in their names, or a code within their professions. Poirot paused, his mustache twitching as an idea struck. The journal's author, A.C., delighted in wordplay. The sum of secrets could be the total number of letters in the guests' surnames, halved as the clue instructed. He quickly jotted down the names he'd memorized. Lady Eleanor Voss, 4 + 4 = 8 letters. Dr. Julian Crane, 5 + 5 = 10 letters. Miss Beatrice Lyle, 4 = 8 letters. Lord Reginald Hawthorne. 9 plus 9 equals 18 letters. Now deceased, Captain Marcus Flint, 6 plus 5 equals 11 letters. Mrs. Clara Winthrop, 6 plus 8 equals 14 letters. Mr. Edgar Poole, 5 plus 5 equals 10 letters. Miss Sylvia Gray, 6 plus 4 equals 10 letters. Professor Lionel Hurst, 6 plus 5 equals 11 letters. Mrs. Agatha Marlowe, 6 plus 7 equals 13 letters. Mr. Victor Slade, 6 plus 5 equals 11 letters. Total, 8 plus 10, 8 plus. 18 plus 11 plus 14, 10, 10, 11 plus. 13 plus 11 equals 104. Halved. That gave 52. The combination, then, began with 1872, followed by 52. Poirot approached the safe, his fingers steady as he spun the dial. 1872. 52. A faint clunk echoed within the safe, but the door did not budge. Sacre bleu. Poirot muttered, "There is more." He returned to the journal's clue, reading it carefully. A waltz of fate, he mused. A waltz moved in threes, a rhythm of steps. Perhaps the numbers needed to be entered in a different sequence, repeated thrice or rearranged. He tried again, this time entering 18, 72, 52 in a repeating pattern, but the safe remained stubborn. Frustration crept in, but Poirot banished it. "Patience, Hercule," he told himself. The mind of AC is cunning, but not invincible. He stepped back, considering the safe itself. Its filigree caught his eye, a pattern of interlocking vines with 3 distinct roses at the center. 3 roses, 3 numbers. Perhaps the clue was simpler than he'd assumed. He tried entering the numbers in reverse. 52, 72, 18. A louder click resounded, and the safe's door swung open with a groan. The contents revealed. Inside the safe lay a slim folder, its edges yellowed with age. Poirot carefully extracted it, noting the faint scent of lavender, a curious detail, as it matched the perfume worn by Mrs. Agatha Marlowe, the reclusive author who had been unusually quiet during the gala. The folder contained a series of documents, each stamped with the initials AC. At the top was a letter, written in the same meticulous hand as the journal. "To whom it may concern. The game is set, the players chosen. One among you is destined to fall, a sacrifice to the perfect crime. The manuscript is the prize, but the truth is the cost. Should you find this, know that I, AC, have woven a web from which there is no escape. The guilty will be named, but not by their hand, by yours." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The letter confirmed his suspicion. AC was orchestrating a scheme to frame one of the guests for murder, using the manor as a stage for a real-life mystery. The documents below the letter were more specific, a list of the guests, each with a dossier detailing their pasts. Lady Voss had once been accused of plagiarism. Dr. Crane had lost his medical license under mysterious circumstances. Miss Lyle's fortune was tied to a scandalous inheritance. Most damning was the entry for Lord Hawthorne, which claimed he had stolen the plot of his unpublished novel from a rival none other than AC himself. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered. "The motive is revenge, but the method is chaos." The documents suggested AC had planned Hawthorne's poisoning to frame another guest. But who? The dossiers were incomplete, with one page missing, likely detailing AC's own identity. Poirot tucked the folder under his arm, determined to secure it before the conspirators realized he'd breached their vault. But as he turned to leave, the lights in the chamber flickered, plunging the space into darkness. A low hum filled the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing in the passage above. Someone had followed him. The blackout and the second poisoning Poirot extinguished his flashlight, relying on his senses to navigate the chamber. The footsteps grew closer, deliberate but cautious, as if the intruder knew the passage's twists. He pressed himself against the wall, clutching the folder tightly. The darkness was absolute, the manor's ancient wiring betraying its age. A blackout, at this precise moment, could not be coincidence. It was sabotage. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a faint rustling near the chamber's entrance. Poirot's mind raced. The intruder likely assumed he was still at the safe, unaware of his position. He crept forward, his movements silent, until he reached the passage's mouth. There, silhouetted against the faint glow of an emergency lantern, from the study above, stood a figure holding a glass decanter. The scent of almonds wafted through the air cyanide, unmistakable and deadly. "Arates!" Poirot barked, stepping into the light. The figure froze, their face obscured by a scarf. In a swift motion, Poirot lunged, knocking the decanter to the ground. It shattered, releasing a faint hiss as the liquid met the stone. The figure bolted, vanishing into the passage before Poirot could pursue. He cursed under his breath, retrieving the folder and hurrying back to the study. The lights flickered back on as he emerged, revealing a chaotic scene. The guests had gathered in the hall outside, their voices raised in panic. "Another poisoning!" Captain Flint shouted, pointing to Miss Sylvia Gray, who lay slumped in a chair, her face pale but her breathing steady. Poirot rushed to her, sighed, noting the overturned glass beside her. The same almond-like scent lingered. "Vite, vite!" Poirot called, gesturing to Dr. Crane. "She lives, but we must act quickly." Crane, despite his questionable past, sprang into action, administering a makeshift antidote from the manor's medical kit. Poirot examined the glass, confirming his suspicions. Cyanide, identical to the decanter in the passage. The blackout had been a distraction, allowing the would-be killer to strike. Miss Gray stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "It was in the wine," she gasped. "I only took a sip." Poirot nodded, his mind already connecting the dots. The cyanide in the passage was meant for another victim, but the killer had adapted, targeting Miss Gray during the chaos. The pattern was clear. A C's plan involved eliminating threats, one by one, while framing an innocent guest. A pattern emerged as Poirot gathered the guests in the dining hall, the folder hidden beneath his coat. Their faces were a tapestry of fear and suspicion, each eyeing the other as a potential murderer. He stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding silence. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice steady, "we are caught in a game most dangerous, orchestrated by one who calls themselves a C, the poisonings. The disappearance of our host, the secrets in this manor, they are all part of a scheme to destroy one among us, while another takes the blame." Lady Voss gasped, her hand clutching her pearls. "But who? And why?" Poirot raised a finger. "The why is clear. Revenge, ambition, perhaps both. The who is more complex. The documents I have found," he patted his coat, careful not to reveal the folder, "suggest that a C seeks to frame one of you for the murder of Lord Hawthorne, and now the attempted murder of Mademoiselle Gray. But I, Hercule Poirot, will not allow this to pass." He paced, his eyes locking onto each guest in turn. The poisonings follow a pattern. The first, Lord Hawthorne, was struck with aconite, a toxin requiring access to the greenhouse. The second, Mademoiselle Gray, was targeted with cyanide, prepared in advance and delivered during the blackout. Both attacks required knowledge of the manor's secrets, its passages, its resources, its weaknesses. Professor Hurst, a wiry man with a penchant for ancient languages, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting one of us is a C?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "I suggest nothing, Professor. I observe. And what I observe is that the killer is among us, but their target is not random. The documents point to a specific individual, one whose secret AC fears most." The room erupted in murmurs, accusations flying like sparks. Poirot raised his hand, silencing them. "I will find this person, and I will stop a sea, but for now we must remain vigilant. No one drinks, no one eats, unless I have inspected it. First." The least likely suspect as the guests dispersed, Poirot retreated to his room, the folder now locked in a suitcase he'd secured with a combination only he knew. He sat at the desk, his notebook open, and began to cross-reference the dossiers with his observations. The pattern of the attacks suggested a methodical mind, but the choice of targets puzzled him. Lord Hawthorne, a braggart with enemies aplenty, was an obvious first victim. But Miss Grey, a quiet heiress with no apparent connection to a sea, seemed an odd choice. He recalled her dossier. Sylvia Grey, orphaned at a young age, had inherited a fortune tied to a publishing empire. Her uncle, a reclusive author, had vanished years ago, leaving her his estate. Could a sea be connected to her past? The lavender scent on the folder nagged at him, pointing to Mrs. Marlowe, but her demeanor timid. Almost frail made her an unlikely mastermind. Yet Poirot knew better than to trust appearances. The least likely suspect, he mused, was often the most dangerous. He made a mental note to question Miss Grey further once she recovered. Her survival was no accident. The small sip she'd taken suggested the killer had underestimated her caution. But the cyanide in the passage indicated a second target, one Poirot himself might have been meant to find. Was he, Hercule Poirot, the intended victim? The thought was audacious, but not impossible. A sea's game was personal, and Poirot's reputation made him a threat. A plan takes shape by evening. The manor's atmosphere had thickened, the storm clouds outside mirroring the tension within. Poirot gathered Captain Flint and Mrs. Winthrop, two guests he tentatively trusted, in the study. Flint, a retired naval officer with a sharp mind, had been quick to assist during the blackout. Mrs. Winthrop, a widow with a knack for observation, had quietly noted the guests' movements during the gala. "Mies Amos," Poirot said, his voice low. "We are at a crossroads. A sea will strike again, and we must be ready. I propose a trap, one that will lure the killer into revealing themselves." Flint raised an eyebrow. "A trap? With what bait?" "The folder," Poirot replied. "It contains the truth a sea wishes to hide. I will let it be known that I have secured it, but I will leave a decoy in its place. The killer will come for it, and we will be waiting." Mrs. Winthrop frowned. "And if they suspect it's a trap?" Poirot smiled, a glint in his eye. "Then we shall make it irresistible. A sea is proud, n'est-ce pas? They will not resist the chance to outwit Hercule Poirot." The plan was set. Poirot would announce his discovery of the folder at dinner, subtly implying its location in the study. Flint and Mrs. Winthrop would watch the guests, noting any who slipped away. Meanwhile, Poirot would hide in the passage, ready to catch the intruder. The folder itself would remain in his suitcase, safe from prying hands. The night's tension dinner was a strained affair, the guests picking at their food despite Poirot's assurances that he'd inspected it. He rose, tapping his glass with a spoon. "Mesdames et sieurs, I have made a discovery. In the study, I have found documents that reveal A.C.'s plan. They are secured, but I warn you, the truth will come to light." The room fell silent, eyes darting between faces. Mrs. Marlowe's hand trembled as she set down her fork. Mr. Slade, a brooding journalist, stared at Poirot with open hostility. Miss Lyle clutched her necklace, her knuckles white. Poirot noted each reaction, filing them away for later. As the evening wore on, the manor grew quiet, the guests retiring to their rooms. Poirot slipped into the passage, his flashlight off to avoid detection. Flint and Mrs. Winthrop took their positions, hidden in the shadows of the hall. The decoy folder, a bundle of blank pages, sat on the study's desk, illuminated by a single Lamp-dot hours passed, the silence broken only by the creak of the manor's beams. Then, a faint click echoed from the study. Poirot tensed, his hand on the passage's hidden latch. A shadow moved across the desk, reaching for the decoy. Before Poirot could act, a second figure appeared, and a muffled cry rang out. He burst into the study, flashlight blazing, to find Mr. Slade pinning Miss Lyle to the ground, a knife at her throat. "Stay back, Poirot," Slade hissed. "She's the one. She's a C." Miss Lyle's eyes were wide with terror. "He's lying. He tried to kill me." Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but firm. "Release her, Monsieur Slade. The truth will reveal itself, but not through violence." Slade hesitated, then dropped the knife, stepping back. Flint and Mrs. Winthrop rushed in, restraining him. Poirot knelt beside Miss Lyle, helping her up. "Are you harmed, mademoiselle?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. He said I was a C, that I'd stolen the folder to cover my tracks. But I only came to find it to prove my innocence." Poirot's eyes flickered to Slade, whose face was a mask of defiance. "And you, monsieur? Why the knife?" Slade sneered. "She's playing you all. I saw her sneaking around last night near the greenhouse. She's the poisoner." Poirot turned to the decoy folder, untouched on the desk. "Yet neither of you took it. Curious, n'est-ce pas?" He picked it up, flipping through the blank pages. "This was a test, and you have both failed. But the night is not over." The chapter's end as Flint escorted Slade and Miss Lyle to their rooms under strict watch. Poirot returned to the passage, the real folder still safe in his possession. The confrontation had revealed much. Slade's aggression suggested desperation, perhaps to deflect suspicion. Miss Lyle's fear seemed genuine, but her presence in the study was no coincidence. The least likely suspect, he reminded himself, could still be a C, the blackout, the cyanide. The documents all pointed to a scheme designed to sow chaos and mistrust. But Poirot was undeterred. The folder's contents had confirmed a C. Goal: to frame an innocent guest for murder, while the true crime likely, the theft of a priceless manuscript, remained hidden. The next step was to identify the manuscript and its significance, but that would require confronting the guest's secrets, head dash on dot, as he locked the folder away. Poirot's thoughts turned to the ghostly apparition reported the previous night. A projector, a theatrical trick, yet another layer of a C's game. He resolved to investigate the manor's upper floors, where the device had been hidden. The night had been long, but Hercule Poirot's little gray cells were just beginning to unravel the deadliest scheme of all. Chapter 6. The Ghostly Apparition. The night hung heavy over Ravenwood Manor, its ancient walls steeped in shadows that seemed to pulse with secrets. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax, and the distant howl of wind through the manor's turrets lent an eerie cadence to the silence. Hercule Poirot, his sharp eyes glinting in the dim light of a single candelabrum, stood at the edge of the grand staircase, his mind a whirl of deductions. The events of the past days, the cryptic invitation, the vanishing host, the poisoned chalice, and the hidden library had woven a tapestry of intrigue, each thread pulling him deeper into a mystery that felt as though it had been crafted to challenge his very intellect. The guests, a motley assembly of literary luminaries, disgraced detectives, and enigmatic heiresses, had retired to their rooms after the chaos of the poisoned chalice incident. Yet the manor refused to settle. Whispers of unease lingered in the corridors, and Poirot's keen senses detected a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle tightening, as if the house itself were holding its breath. He had just secured the coded journal from the hidden library, its pages heavy with the promise of answers, when a faint cry pierced the stillness, echoing from the upper floors. Poirot's head tilted, his mustache twitching as he pinpointed the source. The cry was not one of pain, but of fear high-pitched, almost theatrical. He moved swiftly, his polished shoes silent on the thick Persian rugs, ascending the staircase with the grace of a man half his age. The candelabrum cast flickering shadows, transforming the ornate portraits lining the walls into leering specters. At the top of the stairs, he paused, listening. A second cry, softer now, came from the east wing, where the guest quarters were located. He reached the corridor just as a door flew open, and Miss Evelyn Harrow, the cryptic heiress with eyes like storm clouds, stumbled out, her silk nightgown askew. Her face was pale, her breath coming in short gasps. "Monsieur Poirot," she exclaimed, clutching the doorframe. "I saw it a figure, a ghost, in the hall, just there." She pointed a trembling finger toward the far end of the corridor, where a tall arched window let in slivers of moonlight. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A ghost, mademoiselle? Describe this apparition, if you please." "It was ghastly," Evelyn whispered, her voice quivering with a mix of fear and drama. "A woman, I think, in a flowing white gown, her face obscured, drifting past the window. She vanished into the wall itself." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Vanished, you say? Most curious. Remain here, mademoiselle, and do not move." He strode toward the window, his candle casting long shadows that danced across the paneled walls. The moonlight revealed nothing but the empty corridor, its tapestries undisturbed. Yet Poirot's gaze lingered on the wall where Evelyn claimed. The figure had disappeared. He ran his fingers along the paneling, feeling for irregularities. A faint click rewarded his efforts, and a section of the wall shifted slightly, revealing a hairline seam. "A secret passage, perhaps?" he murmured, to himself, his mind racing. The manor was riddled with such architectural quirks as he had discovered in the hidden library. But a ghost? No, Poirot did not believe in specters. This was a human hand at work, one that sought to unnerve the guests and obscure the truth. Before he could investigate further, a clamor arose from the staircase. Mr. Reginald Thorne, the retired detective with a penchant for bluster, appeared, his nightcap askew and a poker clutched in his hand. Behind him trailed Miss Clara Vane, the rival author whose sharp tongue had already clashed with half the guests. "What's this nonsense about ghosts?" Thorne bellowed, his voice echoing. "I heard the scream from my room." It was no. "Nonsense," Evelyn snapped, regaining her composure. "I know what I saw." Clara raised an eyebrow, her voice dripping with skepticism. "A ghost, Evelyn? Really? This sounds like one of your melodramatic stories." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. "Mies Amos, let us not leap to conclusions. Mademoiselle Harrow, you are certain of what you saw? A woman in white, vanishing into the wall?" Evelyn nodded vigorously. "I swear it, Monsieur Poirot. It was no trick of the light." "Then we shall investigate," Poirot declared. "But first, I must ask, has anyone else seen this apparition?" A murmur ran through the small crowd that had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Mr. Lionel Drake, the playwright with a flair for the theatrical, stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "I saw something similar last night," he admitted, "a fleeting figure in the west wing near the old ballroom. I thought it was a dream, but now—" He trailed off, his expression a mix of intrigue and unease. Poirot's mind clicked like a well-oiled machine. 2 sightings in different parts of the manor, both at night. This was no coincidence. "Monsieur Drake, you will show me this ballroom. The rest of you remain in your rooms. Lock your doors and do not venture out until I return." The guests exchanged wary glances, but complied, dispersing with muttered complaints. Poirot, accompanied by Drake, descended to the west wing, where the ballroom lay shrouded in dust and disuse. The vast room was a relic of grandeur, its chandeliers draped in cobwebs, its parquet floor scuffed, but still gleaming under the moonlight streaming through tall windows. Drake pointed to a corner near a faded tapestry. "There," he said. A figure appeared and vanished behind that wall. Poirot approached the tapestry, his candle illuminating the intricate weave of a hunt scene. He tugged gently, revealing another concealed panel. This one opened with a groan, exposing a narrow passage that smelled of damp stone and secrets. "Most interesting," Poirot murmured. "This manor is a labyrinth of deception." Drake hesitated. "You don't think it's really a ghost, do you, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "A ghost, monsieur? Non, non. The dead do not walk, but the living? They play tricks to hide their motives. Come, let us see where this leads." The passage wound through the manor's bowels, its walls lined with ancient bricks that seemed to whisper of forgotten scandals. Poirot moved cautiously, his candle casting eerie shadows. After several turns, the passage opened into a small chamber, its walls bare save for a single curious device mounted on a tripod. Poirot knelt beside it, his fingers tracing the contours of what appeared to be a projector, its lens pointed toward a small aperture in the wall. "Aha!" Poirot exclaimed softly. "A cinematographic trick, perhaps?" This device could project an image of a woman in white, no doubt onto the walls of the manor, creating the illusion of a ghost. Drake's jaw dropped. "You mean someone staging this? But why?" Poirot's expression darkened. "To frighten, to distract, to manipulate. The question is, who among us has the skill to orchestrate such a performance?" His mind flashed to the guests. Lionel Drake himself was a playwright, well versed in stagecraft. Clara Vane, with her biting wit, had a reputation for elaborate publicity stunts. Even Evelyn Harrow, with her flair for the dramatic, could not be discounted. And then there was Reginald Thorne, whose gruff demeanor might conceal a cunning mind. The journal, locked away in Poirot's room, hinted at a perfect crime orchestrated by a sea, but the specifics remained elusive. This ghostly charade was surely part of the scheme, designed to sow chaos and obscure the true plot. Poirot examined the projector closely. It was a modern contraption, its lens pristine, its mechanism oiled. A small reel of film was loaded, and Poirot carefully removed it, holding it to the light. The frames depicted a spectral figure in a flowing gown, its movements fluid and eerie. "A clever forgery," he mused. "But who placed it here, and to what end?" Drake shifted uncomfortably. "Monsieur Poirot, should we destroy it?" "If. Someone's using this to scare us, perhaps." "None," Poirot interrupted sharply. "We do not destroy evidence. Instead, we use it. This projector will be our bait, monsieur. We shall catch the puppeteer by letting the puppet perform." They returned to the ballroom, Poirot carrying the projector with care. He concealed it behind the tapestry, ensuring it appeared undisturbed, but rigged a subtle trap of thin thread, tied to the device that would alert him if it was tampered with. "Now," he said, turning to Drake, "you will speak of this to no one. Return to your room and act as though nothing has happened. I shall handle the rest." Drake nodded, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of nervousness. Poirot watched him go, his mind already plotting the next move. The ghostly apparitions were a distraction, but from what? The coded journal had mentioned a perfect crime, and the poisoned chalice suggested a willingness to kill. A manuscript. In the hidden library, the secret passages, the missing host, all were pieces of a puzzle that Poirot was determined to solve. As he made his way back to the east wing, a manor seemed to close in around him, its shadows deepening. He paused at the arched window where Evelyn had seen the apparition, re-examining the hidden panel. It led to another passage, this one, descending to the manor cellars. Poirot hesitated and decided against exploring it alone in the dark. Instead, he returned to his room, where the journal lay locked in his valise. He sat at the small desk, the candle casting a warm glow over the journal's leather cover. He opened it, his eyes scanning the coded entries. The riddle he had solved in the library had pointed to Clara, Vane's past a plagiarism scandal that had nearly ruined her career. But the journal's later pages hinted at a larger scheme, one involving a grand performance and a final act. The ghostly figure fit perfectly into this narrative, a theatrical flourish designed to unsettle the guests and divert attention from a seized true goal. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. "The mind behind this is clever," he murmured. But Hercule Poirot is not so easily deceived. He devised a plan. The next night, he would stage his own performance, using the projector to draw out the culprit. He would gather the guests in the ballroom, claiming to have solved the mystery of the ghost. The projector would be activated, but Poirot would be watching not the apparition, but the reactions of those around him. The guilty party, he reasoned, would betray themselves, either through panic or an attempt to tamper with the device. Following evening, the guests assembled in the ballroom, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Poirot stood at the center, his presence commanding despite his diminutive stature. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and authoritative, "you have all heard tales of a ghost haunting Ravenwood Manor. Tonight we shall lay this spectre to rest." He gestured to the tapestry, where the projector remained. "Hidden, I have discovered the source of this apparition, a device, cunningly placed, to create the illusion of a ghost. But illusions, like lies, cannot withstand the light of truth." As he spoke, he signaled to Hastings, his trusted companion, who had arrived at the manor that morning at Poirot's urgent request. Hastings, stationed near the tapestry, activated the projector. The room darkened, and a gasp rippled through the guests as the spectral figure appeared, gliding across the wall in a haunting dance of light and shadow. Poirot's eyes darted from face to face. Evelyn clutched her pearls, her eyes wide. Clara's lips curled into a smirk, as if amused by the spectacle. Thorne's grip tightened on his cane, his jaw set. Drake, however, shifted uneasily, his gaze flickering toward the tapestry. "There!" Poirot cried, pointing to the figure. "Behold the ghost of Ravenwood Manor a trick, nothing more." The guests murmured, some relieved, others skeptical. But Poirot's attention was on Drake, who had taken a step toward the tapestry. Before he could reach it, Poirot sprang forward, pulling the tapestry aside to reveal the projector, and the thread, now snapped, indicating someone had tampered with it. "Monsieur Drake," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade, "you seem most interested in this device. Perhaps you would care to explain why you attempted to disable it just before we began?" Drake froze, his face paling. I was only curious," he stammered. "I wanted to see how it worked." "A curious man does not break a thread meant to catch a culprit," Poirot countered. "You, monsieur, have knowledge of stagecraft. You have written plays with ghostly apparitions, have you not? And this projector bears the mark of your expertise." The guests gasped, turning to Drake, who shook his head vehemently. "This is absurd. I'm no criminal." "Perhaps not," Poirot said, his tone measured. "But you are involved willingly. Or not. Tell me, who instructed you to place this device? Who is Essie?" Drake's shoulders slumped, and for a moment it seemed he might confess. But then he straightened, his eyes hardening. "I don't know any AC," he said defiantly. "And you can't prove I touched that thing." Poirot smiled, a predator's smile. "We shall see, monsieur. The night is young, and Hercule Poirot does not rest until the truth is revealed. The chapter closed with the guests dispersing, their trust in one another shattered. Poirot remained in the ballroom, the projector's ghostly image still flickering in his mind. He had caught a thread of the mystery, but the tapestry was far from complete. The true identity of a sea and the purpose of the ghostly charade remained elusive. But Poirot was certain of one thing. The next act would bring him closer to the heart of the scheme. He adjusted his bow tie, his resolve unshaken, and prepared for the next move in this deadly game of wits. Chapter 7. The Locked Room Puzzle. The air in Ravenwood Manor hung thick with suspicion, a kind that clung to the walls like damp moss. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the grand hall, his sharp eyes scanning the gathered guests. The events of the previous night, the ghostly apparition revealed as a theatrical trick, had left everyone on edge, their trust in one another fraying like an old tapestry. The flickering chandelier above cast long shadows, and the storm outside rumbled, as if nature itself were conspiring to keep secrets locked within the manor's stone walls. Poirot adjusted his mustache, his mind a whirl of calculations. The projector he'd uncovered in the walls had been a clever ruse, but it was merely a thread in the intricate web woven by the mysterious AC. The coded journal, the poisonings, the hidden passages all pointed to a mind that delighted in games, one that dared to challenge Poirot's own. But now a new twist had emerged, one that would test his little gray cells to their limits. It began with a scream, sharp and piercing, slicing through the murmurs of the guests. Poirot's head snapped toward the sound, which came from the upper floor. Without a word, he moved swiftly, his polished shoes clicking against the marble stairs. The others followed, a chaotic procession of nervous glances and hurried footsteps. The scream had come from the east wing, where the guest rooms were situated, and as Poirot reached the corridor, he saw Miss Evelyn Carver, the cryptic heiress, standing pale and trembling outside a heavy oak door. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped, her voice quivering. "It's Mr. Hargrove. He's dead." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Lionel Hargrove, the retired detective with a penchant for gruff cynicism, had been a vocal skeptic of the manor's mysteries, dismissing the ghostly figure as parlor tricks for fools. His death, if true, was no mere accident. Poirot gestured for the others to stay back and approach the door. It was locked, the key still in the keyhole, untouched. He pressed his ear to the wood, hearing only silence within. "Step aside, mademoiselle," he said calmly, producing a small set of lock-picking tools from his waistcoat. With deft precision, he worked the lock, the mechanism yielding with a soft click. The door creaked open, revealing a scene that made even Poirot's composed demeanor falter for a moment. Lionel Hargrove lay slumped in an armchair by the fireplace, his eyes wide and lifeless, a glass of brandy shattered on the floor. Beside him, the room was undisturbed, no signs of a struggle, no footprints in the thick carpet, no windows ajar. The heavy curtains were drawn, and the only other door, leading to a small ensuite bathroom, was also locked from the inside. A classic locked room, Poirot thought, his mind already racing through possibilities. The perfect puzzle for a mind such as A.C.'s. The guests crowded at the doorway, whispering in horror. Dr. Felix Warren, a physician with a nervous tic, pushed forward. "Let me examine him," he demanded, his voice unsteady. Poirot nodded, stepping aside but keeping his eyes on every detail, the angle of Hargrove's body, the position of the glass shards, the faint scent of almonds in the air. Warren knelt beside the body, checking for a pulse. "He's gone," he confirmed, his face ashen. "No visible wounds, but that smell. Cyanide, perhaps?" Poirot's lips pursed. "Perhaps, doctor, but we must not leap to conclusions. The truth, it hides in the details." He turned to the guests. No one is to enter this room. Monsieur Hastings, please guard the door. Captain Arthur Hastings, Poirot's loyal friend, nodded grimly and took position, his military bearing a stark contrast to the anxious crowd. Poirot began his examination, moving with the precision of a watchmaker. The fireplace caught his attention first. It was cold, the logs untouched, but a faint draught stirred the ashes. He knelt, running his fingers along the stone hearth, feeling for irregularities. His fingers brushed against a subtle ridge, and with a gentle press, a small panel clicked open, revealing a narrow chute just wide enough for a man to slip through. "Aha!" Poirot murmured, his eyes gleaming. "The locked room. It is not so locked after all." He stood, dusting his hands, and addressed the guests. "This chute, it leads where, do you think? To another room, perhaps, or to the grounds below. The killer, they have planned their escape." Most carefully, Miss Carver clutched her pearls. But who would do this? And why Mr. Hargrove? Poirot's gaze swept over the group Lady Beatrice Langley, the imperious novelist, Julian Marsh, the playwright with a sharp tongue, Dr. Warren, whose hands trembled slightly, and the others, each a piece in this deadly game. Monsieur Hargrove. He was no fool, Poirot said. He saw through the tricks, yes. Perhaps he saw too much. Poirot instructed Hastings to fetch a torch, and together they explored the chute. It descended at a steep angle, emerging in a disused pantry on the ground floor, its door concealed behind a stack of crates. The pantry's outer door led to the manor's gardens, where the storm had churned the earth into mud. Poirot examined the ground, finding faint footprints leading toward the greenhouse. He made a mental note, but kept this discovery to himself for now. Returning to Hargrove's room, Poirot turned his attention to the desk, where a leather-bound diary lay open. The final entry, written in Hargrove's scrawling hand, read, "A C. Is closer than we think. The journal's code, I've cracked it. It's not just a game. Meet me at midnight to expose them." The entry was dated that very night. Poirot's mustache twitched. Mon Dieu, he was so close to the truth. And for that, he paid the ultimate price. He gathered the guests in the drawing room, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion. "Monsieur, Hargrove was murdered," he announced, his voice steady but commanding. "The killer, they used a hidden chute to enter and leave, locking the door to create the illusion of an impossible crime. But Poirot, he sees through such illusions. The diary, it tells us Hargrove knew something of a C's identity. We must find who he intended to meet at midnight." Lady Langley scoffed. "This is preposterous. Are we to believe one of us is a murderer? Hargrove was old, probably drank too much of that brandy." Poirot's eyes fixed on her. "The brandy, madame? It was poisoned. The smell of almonds, it does not lie. And the chute, it was used. These are facts, not fancies." Julian Marsh leaned forward, his voice low. Hargrove was always poking his nose where it didn't belong. If he cracked that journal, maybe? He threatened the wrong person. Poirot nodded. "A possibility, monsieur. But we must consider all. Who among you was to meet Hargrove at midnight?" Silence fell, heavy as the storm outside. Finally, Miss Carver spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. He asked me to meet him. Said he had proof about a C, but I swear, I didn't go. I was too frightened after that ghostly nonsense last night." Poirot studied her, noting the tremor in her hands. "And yet, mademoiselle, you did not mention this earlier. Why?" "I thought it wasn't important," she cried. "I didn't want to be involved." Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. "No one is above suspicion. But fear not, Poirot. We'll find the truth." He turned to Hastings, lowering his voice. "Mon ami, we must set a trap. The killer, they believe their secret is safe, but they are wrong. We will use their confidence against them." Hastings nodded, his eyes bright with determination. "What's the plan, Poirot?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "We will announce that I, Hercule Poirot, have found Hargrove's notes. That reveal A.C.'s identity. But these notes, they do not exist. We will watch who reacts, who panics. The killer, they will act to protect themselves." That evening, Poirot gathered the guests once more, his demeanor grave. "Mesdames et messieurs, I have made a discovery. In Monsieur Hargrove's room, I found notes hidden beneath the floorboards. They name S.C. and their motive. Tomorrow, I shall reveal all to the authorities." The room erupted in whispers. Dr. Warren's tic worsened, his fingers twitching. Lady Langley's face paled, her fan snapping shut. Marsh's eyes darted to the door, while Miss Carver clutched her shawl tightly. Poirot watched them all, his mind cataloging every reaction dot as the guests dispersed. Poirot and Hastings positioned themselves in the shadows of the east wing, near Hargrove's room. They waited, the silence broken only by the storm's distant growl. Hours passed, the clock ticking toward midnight. Then a faint creak echoed from the corridor. Poirot's hand tightened on his cane, his senses alert. A figure emerged, cloaked in darkness, moving toward Hargrove's door. They carried a small tool, likely to search for the non-existent notes. Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "Bonsoir. You are looking for something, oui?" The figure froze, then turned, revealing Dr. Warren's startled face. "Monsieur Poirot, I was just checking the room." To ensure nothing was missed, Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A curious time for such diligence, Doctor. Perhaps you seek to destroy evidence, non?" Warren stammered, his tic betraying his nerves. "That's absurd. I'm a physician, not a murderer." "Yet you are here," Poirot said, stepping closer. "And the chute, it was used by someone with knowledge of the manor's secrets. You, Doctor, have been here before, have you not?" Warren's face crumpled, and he sank against the wall. I only wanted to protect myself. Hargrove knew something about my past mistake, long buried. He was going to expose me." Poirot's expression remained impassive. "And so you silenced him?" "No," Warren cried. "I didn't kill him. I came to find his notes, yes, but I swear, I didn't touch him." Poirot studied him, then nodded to Hastings. "Take him to the library. We will continue this discussion there." As Hastings escorted Warren away, Poirot lingered in the corridor, his mind racing. Warren's panic was genuine, but was it the fear of a killer or a man caught in a web not of his making? The diary's mention of a midnight meeting suggested another player, one still hidden. Poirot returned to Hargrove's room, re-examining the scene. The brandy glass, the chute, the diary, all pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a larger truth. Moved to the fireplace, inspecting the chute's mechanism again. A small scrap of fabric caught his eye, snagged on a jagged edge. It was fine silk, deep blue, unlike anything Warren wore. Poirot tucked it into his pocket, a new clue to pursue. The night stretched on, and Poirot gathered the guests in the library, where Warren sat, head in hands. "Mes amis," Poirot began, "the death of Monsieur Hargrove is no accident. The killer, they are among us, and they grow bold. But Poirot, he is bolder still. I propose a plan a way to draw the killer out." He turned to Miss Carver. "Mademoiselle, you said Hargrove wished to meet you. Tomorrow, you will announce that you have remembered something vital from that conversation. Something that names A.C. the killer. They will come for you, and when they do, Poirot will be ready." Miss Carver paled but nodded. "I'll do it, Monsieur Poirot, for Mr. Hargrove." The guests murmured, some in agreement, others in fear. Poirot's eyes swept over them, lingering on Lady Langley's clenched hands and Marsh's averted gaze. The trap was set, but the game was far from over. Assiz's scheme was a labyrinth, and Poirot was only beginning to navigate its twists dock as the guests retired. Poirot remained in the library, the diary open before him. The coded entries hinted at a motive tied to literary ambition, but the scrap of silk suggested a more personal betrayal. He closed the book, his mind alight with possibilities. The locked room was no longer a mystery, but the killer's identity remained elusive. Tomorrow he would tighten the noose, but for now he needed rest to keep his little gray cells sharp. The storm raged on, and Ravenwood Manor held its secrets close, but Hercule Poirot was undeterred. The truth, he knew, was within his grasp, waiting to be uncovered by the one man clever enough to see it. Chapter 8. The Midnight Confession. The air in Ravenwood Manor was thick with the scent of wax and worry, the candles flickering like nervous sentinels as Hercule Poirot paced the grand hall. The events of the morning, the discovery of Mr. Hargroves, body in the locked study, the hidden mechanism in the fireplace, and the diary hinting at Assiz's identity had left the guests in a state of restless agitation. Poirot, however, was a man of order, his mind a finely tuned instrument slicing through the chaos. The trap he had set, a subtle provocation hidden in his earlier conversations, was about to bear fruit. He could feel it, the way a hunter senses the rustle of prey in the underbrush dot. It was nearing midnight, and the manor's great clock loomed over the hall, its pendulum swinging with a ponderous tick that seemed to count down to something inevitable. Poirot had gathered the guests earlier. That evening, his words carefully chosen to stir unease. He had spoken of the diary, hinting at its revelations without disclosing too much, and watched their faces, some pale, some defiant, all guarded. His trap was simple, a suggestion that he was close to unmasking Assiz, laced with just enough ambiguity to provoke a reaction. Someone, he knew, would crack under the pressure. The guests were now dispersed, some lingering in the drawing room, others retreating to their chambers, but Poirot remained vigilant. He had positioned himself near the staircase, a vantage point. That allowed him to observe the comings and goings of the manor's inhabitants. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, stood nearby, his brow furrowed with concern. "Poirot, are you sure this will work? What if the killer doesn't take the bait?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "Mon ami, the human heart is predictable in its panic. When one feels the net tightening, one does not sit still, one acts. And in acting, one reveals oneself." As if on cue, a soft creak echoed from the corridor above. Poirot's eyes flicked upward, catching the faint flicker of a shadow on the wall. He gestured for Hastings to remain silent and moved toward the staircase, his steps light as a cat's. The shadow belonged to Miss Clara Whitmore, the young heiress whose nervous demeanor had marked her as a person of interest from the moment. Poirot arrived. Her silk gown rustled faintly as she descended, clutching a small velvet pouch in her hands. She froze when she saw Poirot, her eyes wide like a deer caught in a hunter's sights. "Mademoiselle Whitmore," Poirot said, his voice smooth but edged with authority. "It is late for a promenade, non? Perhaps you have something to share." With Poirot? Clara's lips parted, but no sound came. She clutched the pouch tighter, her knuckles whitening. I couldn't sleep," she stammered. "I thought a walk might calm my nerves." Poirot tilted his head, his gaze piercing. "And this pouch, mademoiselle? It is not for calming the nerves, I think. Shall we see what it contains?" Clara's. Shoulders sagged, and for a moment Poirot thought she might faint. Instead, she sank onto the bottom step, her hands trembling as she opened the pouch. Inside were a collection of small objects, a vial of colorless liquid, a folded letter, and a silver locket engraved with the initials AC. Poirot's heart quickened, but his face remained impassive. "I didn't mean for any of this," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought it was a game." Poirot knelt beside her, his movements deliberate, his tone gentle but probing. "A game, mademoiselle? Tell Poirot everything. The truth, it is the only path now." Clara's confession came in a rush, like a dam breaking under the weight of too much water. She spoke of a letter she had received months ago, signed only with the initials AC, offering her a chance to secure her family's legacy. The Whitmores, she explained, were on the brink of ruin, their fortunes squandered by her late father's gambling debts. The letter promised wealth and redemption in exchange for her cooperation in a literary experiment. She was to come to Ravenwood Manor, play her part, and deliver certain items to specific guests at appointed times. "I thought it was harmless," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was to slip notes under doors, leave packages in hidden places. But then Mr. Hargrove died, and I realized it wasn't a game. I found this pouch in my room tonight, with instructions to leave it in the chapel. I didn't know what to do." Poirot examined the vial, holding it to the candlelight. The liquid inside was odorless, but he suspected it was the same rare toxin that had claimed the life of the guest at dinner. The letter, written in a looping script, contained cryptic instructions about a meeting in the chapel at midnight. The locket, however, intrigued him most. He opened it to reveal a tiny photograph of a woman he did not recognize, her features obscured by age and wear. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, his voice firm, "you have been used, but you are not without fault. Why did you not come to Poirot sooner?" "I was afraid," Clara admitted. "The letters, they knew things about my family, secrets no one else could know. I thought if I disobeyed, they'd ruin us completely." Poirot stood, his mind racing. Clara's confession was a breakthrough, but it was also a deflection. She had admitted to minor crimes, delivering messages, planting items, but she had stopped short of confessing to murder. Was she truly a pawn, or was she playing a deeper game? The mention of the chapel meeting was the key. If a C was orchestrating a rendezvous, Poirot would be there to intercept it. "Hastings," Poirot said, turning to his friend, "escort Mademoiselle Whitmore to her room and ensure she remains there. She is not to leave until I say so." Hastings nodded, helping Clara to her feet. She looked at Poirot, her eyes pleading. Will you protect me?" Poirot's expression softened, but only slightly. "If you have told Poirot the truth, mademoiselle, you have nothing to fear. But if you have withheld anything, the consequences will find you." As Hastings led Clara away, Poirot slipped the pouch into his pocket and made his way to the chapel, a small stone-walled sanctuary at the far end of the manor. The air grew colder as he approached, the scent of damp stone mingling with the faint perfume of incense. The chapel door was ajar, a sliver of moonlight spilling through the stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the pews. Poirot slipped inside, his senses alert. The chapel was empty, but the silence felt heavy, expectant. He moved to the altar, where a single candle burned, its flame steady despite the draught. Beneath it was a small note, written in the same looping script as the one in Clara's pouch. It read, "The game ends at midnight. The truth lies in the shadows." Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line. AC was playing with him, taunting him with riddles. He extinguished the candle and retreated to the shadows, positioning himself behind a pillar where he could observe without being seen. The clock in the manor struck midnight, its chimes reverberating through the stone walls. Moments later, a figure entered the chapel, cloaked in a dark hood. Poirot's breath caught as he recognized the gate Mr. Leonard Vale, the retired detective, who had been a thorn in Poirot's side since the gala began. Vale's gruff demeanor and penchant for undermining Poirot's methods had marked him as a rival. But now, his presence in the chapel suggested something more sinister. Vale approached the altar, his movements cautious. He reached beneath it, retrieving a small package wrapped in black cloth. As he turned to leave, Poirot stepped from the shadows, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Monsieur Vale, you are late for your rendezvous. Or perhaps you are early for your reckoning?" Vale froze, his hand tightening around the package. "Poirot," he growled, his voice low and rough. "You're meddling in things you don't understand." "Au contraire," Poirot replied, stepping closer. "I understand perfectly. You are here to collect something for a C, are you not? Or perhaps you are a C himself." Vale's eyes narrowed, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he lunged, his fists swinging toward Poirot's head. Poirot, agile despite his fastidious appearance, sidestepped the blow, using Vale's momentum to trip him. The package fell, spilling its contents, a small dagger and a vial identical to the one in Clara's pouch. Poirot pinned Vale to the ground, his knee pressing into the man's back. "You will explain, monsieur, or I shall ensure the authorities." "Hear of this." Vale struggled, but Poirot's grip was firm. "It's not what you think," Vale gasped. "I'm not a C. I was hired to retrieve these, to protect the manuscript. I didn't kill anyone." "Then who did?" Poirot demanded, his voice icy. Vale's resistance faltered, and he slumped against the stone floor. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I heard whispers. A plan to frame someone, to make it look like they're behind it all. The meeting tonight was to hand over the evidence, to keep it out of the wrong hands." Poirot released him, stepping back, but keeping the dagger and vial out of reach. "And who are these wrong hands, monsieur?" Vale hesitated, then whispered a name. "Evelyn Carver." Poirot's mind raced. The actress, with her theatrical flair and penchant for dramatics, had been the one to discover Hargrove's body. Was she truly the mastermind, or was Vale deflecting? Suspicion? The confession, like Clara's, was incomplete, a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. "Return to your room, Monsieur Vale," Poirot said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "and speak of this to no one. Poirot will decide what is to be done." As Vale slunk away, Poirot examined the dagger and vial. The blade was etched with a faint symbol, a quill crossed with a serpent, the same motif he had seen in the hidden library. The vial, he suspected, contained more of the deadly toxin. He pocketed both, his mind already turning to the chapel meeting Clara had mentioned. If a C was orchestrating a gathering, it would be the perfect opportunity to unmask them. Poirot returned to the manor, his steps quickening as he formulated a plan. He would infiltrate the midnight meeting, posing as one of the conspirators. But first, he needed an ally he could trust. He found Hastings in the drawing room, sipping a brandy. To steady his nerves. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low, "we have work to do. There is a meeting in the chapel at midnight, and Poirot intends to be there. But we must be clever, mon ami. A fox is cunning, and we must be more so." Hastings nodded, his earlier doubts replaced by determination. "What's the plan, Poirot?" Poirot outlined his strategy. He would disguise himself as Vale, using the man's cloak and gruff demeanor to blend into the meeting. Hastings would keep watch outside the chapel, ready to intervene if things went awry. The plan was risky, but Poirot thrived on such challenges, his little gray cells humming with anticipation as the clock neared midnight. Poirot donned Vale's cloak, adjusting his posture to mimic the detective's slouch. He slipped into the chapel once more, the darkness enveloping him like a second skin. The other conspirators arrived one by one, their faces obscured by hoods. Poirot counted 5 figures, their whispers low and urgent. He strained to hear, catching fragments of their conversation. The manuscript, it must be destroyed. The frame is set. One voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the others. Enough. The plan is in motion. By dawn, the world will know who the true genius is. Poirot's heart pounded. The voice was unmistakable Evelyn Carver. But before he could act, a hand clamped onto his shoulder, and a cold blade pressed against his throat. "You're not Vale," a voice hissed in his ear. "Who are you?" Poirot's mind raced, but his voice remained calm. "I am System. Asterisk, today's date and time is 5:19 p.m. PKT on Monday, July 14th, 2025. Chapter 9. The Chapel Conspiracy. The night air clung to Ravenwood Manor like a shroud, heavy with the scent of damp earth and impending rain. Hercule Poirot adjusted his impeccable mustache, his sharp eyes scanning the darkened corridors as he moved silently toward the chapel. The manor, with its labyrinthine passages and creaking floors, seemed to whisper secrets at every turn. The events of the past days, the cryptic invitation, the vanishing host, the poisonings, and the ghostly apparitions had woven a tapestry of intrigue that demanded his utmost attention. Now, armed with the knowledge of a secret meeting in the chapel, Poirot was determined to unravel the next thread in a seized deadly scheme. The chapel lay at the manor's western edge, a Gothic relic of stained glass and weathered stone, its spire piercing the moonless sky. Poirot's polished shoes clicked softly against the flagstones as he approached, his mind racing through the clues he'd gathered. The coded journal from the hidden library, the poisoned chalice, the locked room murder, all pointed to a meticulously orchestrated plot. The confession he'd extracted in the midnight hour had revealed this clandestine gathering, where the conspirators planned to steal a priceless manuscript, a literary treasure said to be the crowning jewel of Assis's collection. But who was Assis, and what drove this shadowy figure to weave such a perilous game? Poirot's little gray cells buzzed with anticipation. He paused at the chapel's heavy oak door. Its iron hinges rusted from years of neglect. A faint glow flickered through the crack beneath, betraying the presence of light within. Poirot pressed, his ear to the wood, catching muffled voices low, urgent, and laced with tension. He recognized the clipped cadence of Evelyn Marsh, the heiress with a penchant for cryptic remarks, and the gruff timbre of Reginald Holt, the retired detective whose skepticism of Poirot's methods had been palpable from the start. A third voice, softer and less distinct, eluded him. Could it be Assis themselves, or another pawn in this elaborate chess game? Poirot's hand hovered over the door handle, but he hesitated. Charging in would scatter the conspirators like startled rooks. And he needed answers, not chaos. Instead, he circled the chapel, his eyes scanning for an alternative entry. The stained glass windows, depicting somber saints and martyred knights, were too high and too fragile. But at the rear, half hidden by overgrown ivy, he spotted a small, arched window, its latch loose and inviting. With a nimble grace belying his fastidious appearance, Poirot climbed the ivy, his fingers finding purchase in the crumbling mortar. The window creaked as he eased it open, and he slipped inside, landing lightly on the chapel's stone floor. The interior was a cavern of shadows, illuminated only by a cluster of candles on the altar. Their flickering light cast eerie patterns. Across the vaulted ceiling, where carved angels seemed to watch with disapproval, Poirot crouched behind a pew, his breath steady as he observed the scene. Evelyn Marsh stood near the altar, her emerald gown shimmering faintly, her fingers clutching a small leather-bound book. Reginald Holt paced nearby, his weathered face taut with impatience. The third figure, cloaked in a dark hood, stood in the shadows, their face obscured. "We're running out of time," Holt growled, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "The manuscript must be secured tonight. If Poirot gets any closer, we're finished." Evelyn's lips curled into a sneer. "You underestimate him, Reginald. He's already sniffing too close to the truth. That journal in the library did." "You ensure it was locked away?" "Of course," Holt snapped. "But he's like a bloodhound. He'll find it again unless we act." The cloaked figure spoke, their voice a low, deliberate murmur. "Patience. The manuscript is safe for now, hidden where no one, not even Poirot, will look, but we must move it before dawn. The buyer arrives tomorrow." Poirot's heart quickened. A buyer? This was no mere theft for personal gain. It was a transaction, a betrayal of literary legacy for profit. The manuscript, rumored to be an unpublished work by a literary titan, was the key to a seize scheme. But why stage such an elaborate charade, disappearances, poisonings, and ghostly apparitions, merely to steal a book? There was more at play, a motive rooted in vengeance or ambition, and Poirot intended to uncover it. He shifted slightly, his knee brushing against the pew. A faint creak broke the silence, and the cloaked figure's head snapped toward his hiding place. What was that? They hissed. Holt froze, his hand darting to his pocket, where Poirot suspected a weapon lay concealed. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows. "It's this old place," she said, though her voice betrayed unease. "The wind, perhaps." Poirot held his breath, his mind racing for a diversion. He reached into his pocket, retrieving a small silver cigarette case, a prop, as he did not smoke, but useful for such moments. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it toward the far corner of the chapel. It clattered against the stone, drawing all eyes. Holt cursed and strode toward the sound, while Evelyn clutched the book tighter. Seizing the moment, Poirot slipped from his hiding place and moved silently along the wall, positioning himself closer to the altar. He needed to hear more, to identify the cloaked figure and confirm their role. But as he edged forward, a floorboard groaned under his weight. The cloaked figures spun, their hood falling back to reveal a face Poirot had not expected. Clara Vane, the quiet novelist who had seemed peripheral to the drama, her mousy demeanor a perfect disguise. "Poirot!" Clara spat, her voice no longer soft but venomous. "You meddling fool!" Holt whirled, drawing a pistol, but Poirot was already moving. He dove behind the altar, knocking over a candelabrum. The candles fell, their flames licking at the dry wood of the pews. A small fire sparked, sending tendrils of smoke into the air. Evelyn shrieked, clutching the book as she backed toward the door. "Stop him," Clara barked, her composure unraveling. "He can't leave this chapel." Poirot's mind worked furiously. A fire was a distraction, but a dangerous one. He needed to escape with the information he'd gained and avoid becoming the next victim. He spotted a narrow door behind the altar, likely leading to the manor's grounds. As Holt advanced, pistol in hand, Poirot grabbed a heavy brass candlestick and hurled it, striking Holt's wrist. The gun clattered to the floor, and Poirot sprinted for the door. The night air hit him like a slap as he burst onto the manors grounds, the chapel's glow fading behind him. The grounds were a maze of overgrown hedges and twisting paths, the perfect terrain for a chase. He heard shouts behind him, Clara's voice rallying Holt and Evelyn. Poirot's heart pounded, but his mind remained clear. He needed to lose them, to buy time to process what he'd learned. Clara Vane was a key player. The manuscript was to be sold, and the buyer was arriving at dawn. He darted into the hedge maze, its towering walls swallowing him in shadow. The conspirators' footsteps echoed behind, but Poirot knew these grounds better than they suspected. He'd studied the manor's layout during his first day, noting the maze's pattern from an upstairs window. Left, right, left again he navigated with precision. his breath steady despite the pursuit. The shouts grew fainter, but he heard Clara's voice, sharp and commanding. "Split up. He can't go far." Poirot reached the maze's center, a small clearing with a weathered fountain. He paused, listening. The conspirators were closing in, their steps crunching on gravel. He needed a plan, not just to escape, but to turn the tables. His eyes fell on the fountain, its base overgrown with vines. An idea sparked. He tore at the vines, revealing a rusted grate, a drainage tunnel, likely leading back to the manor, or beyond. It was a gamble, but Poirot was no stranger to calculated risks. He pried the grate open, wincing at the screech of metal, and slipped inside. The tunnel was damp and narrow, the air thick with mildew. He crawled forward, his suit inevitably ruined but his focus unshaken. The tunnel sloped downward, then curved, emerging near the manor stables. Poirot emerged, brushing dirt from his sleeves, and scanned the grounds. The conspirators were nowhere in sight, but he knew they'd return to the chapel to regroup. He circled back toward the manor, keeping to the shadows. The chapel's faint glow was now ablaze. His accidental fire had spread. Guilt tugged at him, but he pushed it aside. The manuscript was still out there, and Clara's revelation had confirmed its importance. He needed to find it before the buyer arrived, and he needed to expose A.C.'s true identity. Inside the manor, Poirot slipped into the library, where the coded journal lay locked in a drawer. He retrieved it, his fingers tracing the cryptic symbols. Clara's involvement suggested she was either A.C. or a close ally. The journal's latest riddle, scrawled in A.C.'s elegant hand, read, "Where shadows dance and secrets sleep, treasure lies in silence deep." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The chapel was too obvious. The manuscript was elsewhere, hidden in a place of silence. The manor's old bell tower, long unused, came to mind. Its bell had been silenced decades ago, and its shadowed heights were rarely visited. He moved swiftly, climbing the tower's spiral stairs. At the top, he found a dusty chamber, its floor littered with broken beams. In the corner, beneath a loose floorboard, he uncovered a locked box. His lock-picking skills, honed over years of unconventional investigations, made quick work of it. Inside was the manuscript, its pages yellowed but intact, titled The Final Act. A quick scan revealed it was no ordinary work. It was a confession, disguised as fiction, detailing a scandal that could ruin a literary empire. A.C. had planned to sell it to destroy a rival, but who? A noise below jolted him. Clara and Holt were ascending the stairs, their voices sharp with urgency. Poirot tucked the manuscript into his coat and scanned for an escape. The tower's window overlooked the grounds. A perilous drop, but a rope, coiled in the corner, offered a chance. He secured it to a beam and began his descent, the manuscript safe against his chest dot. As his feet touched the ground, Clara's shout rang out from above. "He's got it! Stop him!" Poirot ran, the manuscript, a heavy weight against his heart. The grounds blurred past as he wove through trees, his mind already planning the confrontation. Clara was unmasked, the manuscript secured, but A.C.'s shadow loomed larger than ever. The game was far from over, but Poirot, with his little gray, CELLS, an unyielding resolve, was ready for the next move. Chapter 10. The betrayer unmasked. The air in Ravenwood Manor was thick with suspicion, a kind that clung to the ornate wallpaper and seeped into the very marrow of its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand parlor, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the Persian rug, his mustache impeccably trimmed as always, a silent testament to his unshakable composure. The events of the past days, the vanishing host, the poisoned chalice, the ghostly apparitions, and the locked-room murder had woven a tapestry of intrigue that even he, with his legendary little gray cells, found daunting. Yet Poirot thrived. In such complexity, his mind a finely tuned instrument, plucking at the threads of deception to unravel the truth. The previous night's events in the chapel had confirmed his suspicions. The mysterious Assise, the puppet master behind this deadly game, was orchestrating a plot not just to steal a priceless manuscript, but to weave a narrative so intricate it rivaled the works of Agatha Christie herself. The conspirator Poirot had overheard a figure, cloaked in shadows, had spoken of Assise's grand vision, a real-life mystery where the stakes were not merely fictional but fatal. Now, as dawn broke over the manor's frost-kissed grounds, Poirot knew the time had come to confront the betrayer in their midst. The parlor was a hive of nervous energy. The remaining guests, 9 in total, after the tragic losses, gathered reluctantly, their faces a gallery of guarded expressions. There was Evelyn Harcourt, the cryptic heiress with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. Sir Reginald Voss, the retired detective whose gruff demeanor masked a sharp intellect. Clara Beaumont, the fiery author whose rivalry with Assise was no secret. And others, each a potential pawn or player in this deadly chess game. Poirot had summoned them here, ostensibly to discuss the manuscript's safety, but his true purpose was far more audacious: to unmask the conspirator who had betrayed them all. Mies Amos. Poirot began, his voice smooth as velvet, cutting through the murmurs. He stood by the fireplace, its crackling flames casting flickering shadows across his diminutive frame. We stand at a crossroads in this affair. The events of last night have revealed a truth most grave. Among us walks a traitor, one who is allied with the elusive Assise to bring ruin upon us all. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her pearl necklace, while Sir Reginald's bushy brows furrowed, his gaze darting to the others. Clara, seated on a velvet settee, crossed her arms defiantly. "And what proof do you have, Monsieur Poirot?" she challenged, her voice sharp. "You've been spinning tales of conspiracies and secret passages, but where's the evidence?" Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile, his eyes gleaming with the quiet confidence of a man who held all the cards. "The evidence, Madame Beaumont, is in the details, the little inconsistencies that betray the guilty heart. Last night, in the chapel, I overheard a conversation that confirmed the existence of a plot to steal the manuscript. But more than that, I heard a voice I recognized." The room fell silent, save for the snap of the fire. Every eye was on Poirot, some with fear, others with defiance. He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his polished shoes tapping rhythmically against the floor. "The conspirator," he continued, "is someone who has played their part with exquisite care, hiding behind a mask of innocence. But the mask, it slips, does it not? In the chapel, I heard a phrase, a turn of speech that I have heard before in this very manner, and it belongs to none other than Mademoiselle Violette Durand." A gasp broke the silence. Violette, a young woman of delicate features and a demure demeanor, sat frozen in her chair, her wide blue eyes darting like a cornered doe's. She was the least likely suspect, a quiet, unassuming guest who had spoken little during the gala, her presence often overshadowed by the more flamboyant personalities. Her hands trembled as she clutched her shawl, her voice barely a whisper. "Monsieur Poirot, you are mistaken. I am no traitor." The others turned to her, their expressions a mix of shock and suspicion. Sir Reginald leaned forward, his voice gruff. "Violette?" "The girls barely said a word since we arrived." "You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot." "Am I, Sir Reginald?" Poirot's tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp as daggers. "Permit me to explain. Mademoiselle Durand, you have presented yourself as a mere observer, a wallflower in this grand drama. Yet It is precisely this quietude that makes you so dangerous. In the chapel, I heard a voice speak of the manuscript's true value and the ruin of a rival. The cadence, the choice of words, it was yours, mademoiselle, as surely as I stand here. Violet's face paled, her lips parting as if to protest, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. There is more. The projector used to create the ghostly apparition in Chapter 6. It required knowledge of theatrical mechanics, a skill you claimed to lack. Yet I discovered in the Manor's library a book on stagecraft, bookmarked at a page detailing precisely such a device. And who was seen lingering in the library before the apparition appeared? You, Mademoiselle Durand. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Violet's composure cracked, her hands twisting in her lap. This is absurd, she cried, her voice rising. I was in the library, yes, but only to read. I know nothing of projectors or conspiracies. Then explain, Poirot said, his voice soft but unyielding, why your handkerchief was found in the chapel, near the very spot where the conspirators met. A delicate thing embroidered with your initials V.D. It was no coincidence, I think. The room erupted in murmurs. Evelyn Harcourt leaned toward Clara, whispering, could she really be involved? Clara's eyes narrowed, her mind clearly racing. Sir Reginald stood, his face red with indignation. This is preposterous, Poirot. You're accusing a young woman on the basis of a handkerchief? Anyone could have placed it there. Precisement, Poirot replied, his gaze never leaving Violet. Anyone could have placed it there to frame Mademoiselle Durand, perhaps. But the evidence does not lie. The voice, the handkerchief, the book, they form a pattern, one that points to you, mademoiselle. And yet, he paused, his eyes softening slightly. I sense there is more to your story. Speak now, or the consequences will be severe. Violet's shoulders slumped, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The room held its breath, waiting for her response. For a moment, it seemed she would collapse under the weight of Poirot's scrutiny. Then, in a voice barely audible, she whispered, I was approached by a sea. The admission sent a shockwave through the room. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sir Reginald sat down heavily, his bluster deflated. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, calculating. Poirot, however, remained impassive, his hands folded neatly before him. Continue, mademoiselle, he urged gently. Tell us everything. Violet's voice trembled as she spoke, her words spilling out like a dam breaking. It began before the gala. I received a letter, much like yours, Monsieur Poirot, but it was different. It promised me a chance to prove myself, to step out of my father's shadow. My father, you see, was a publisher, disgraced after a scandal involving a forged manuscript. AC knew this. They offered me a deal, help them, and they would restore my family's name. And what was your role in this scheme? Poirot asked, his tone neutral but probing. I was to watch, Violet said, her voice breaking. To report on the guests, their movements, their secrets. I didn't know about the poisonings or the murder. I swear it. A told me it was. About the manuscript, about exposing Clara Beaumont's plagiarism. I thought it was a game, a literary rivalry. Clara shot to her feet, her face flushed with fury. Plagiarism? How dare you? My work is my own, you little. Enough, Madame Beaumont. Poirot's voice cracked like a whip, silencing her. Mademoiselle Durand, you say you thought it was a game. Yet you placed the handkerchief in the chapel, did you not? To mislead us? To protect Assis's identity? Violet shook her head frantically. No, I dropped it by accident. I was there, yes, but only to listen, to report back. I didn't know they would use it against me. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind working at lightning speed. Violet's confession was compelling, but it was also too convenient, perhaps. A true conspirator might weave such a tale to deflect suspicion, yet her fear seemed genuine. He decided to press further, to test the limits of her story. "And who, mademoiselle, is AC? You have met this person, non? Describe them." Violet hesitated, her eyes darting to the other guests. I never saw their face. They communicated through notes, left in my room or hidden in the library. But I know they're here, among us. They spoke of a plan to stage a mystery, to make it real, to ruin Clara and others who crossed them. They called it Christie's Deadliest Scheme. The phrase sent a chill through the room. It echoed the cryptic invitation Poirot had received, the words that had drawn him to Ravenwood Manor. He felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting, aligning, but the full picture remained just out of reach. Violet was a pawn, perhaps, but not the mastermind. AC was still out there, pulling the strings. Before Poirot could press further, a loud crash echoed from the hallway, followed by a scream. The guests jumped to their feet, their nerves frayed to breaking. Poirot moved swiftly to the door, his cane tapping urgently against the floor. "Stay here," he commanded, but Sir Reginald and Evelyn followed, their curiosity overriding their fear. In the hallway, they found a shattered vase, its fragments scattered across the marble floor. Above it, a window swung open, the curtains billowing in the cold morning breeze. Poirot's eyes scanned the scene, his mind racing. "An attempt on my life, perhaps," he murmured, noting the heavy brass candlestick that lay among the shards. Its base dented as if it had been thrown. "Someone tried to kill you," Evelyn gasped, her hand clutching Poirot's arm. "This is madness." "Non, madame," Poirot said, his voice calm but firm. "It is calculation. The candlestick was meant to warn. AC knows I am close to the truth, and they seek to intimidate me." He turned to Sir Reginald, his eyes sharp. "Sir, please secure the window. We must ensure no one leaves the manor." As Sir Reginald moved to comply, Poirot returned to the parlor, where Violet sat, her face buried in her hands. The other guests hovered, their whispers a chorus of distrust. Poirot raised a hand for silence, his presence commanding the room. "Mies Amos, the danger is far from over. Mademoiselle Durand has given us a piece of the puzzle, but the heart of this mystery remains hidden. AC is among us, and they will strike again unless we act." He turned to Violet, his gaze softening but resolute. "Mademoiselle, you have made a choice to speak, and for that I commend you. But you must do more. You will help me protect the manuscript and unmask AC. In return, I will ensure your role in this affair is judged fairly." Violet nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'll do whatever you ask, Monsieur Poirot. I never wanted anyone to die." Poirot nodded, his mind already turning to the next step. He addressed the group, his voice steady. "We must work together, Mies Amos. The manuscript is the key to AC's plan, and we will protect it at all costs. I propose an alliance, an uneasy one perhaps, but necessary. We will guard the manor, watch each other, and ensure no one acts alone." "Agreed?" The guests exchanged wary glances, but one by one they nodded. Clara, still fuming, muttered, "I don't trust her," gesturing at Violet, but she acquiesced. Sir Reginald clapped a hand on Poirot's shoulder. "You're a mad genius, Poirot. I'm in." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice cool but determined. "I'll help, monsieur." Poirot, "But mark my words, if Violet betrays us again, I'll deal with her myself." Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging her resolve. "Very well. We begin immediately. The manuscript must be secured, and we must be vigilant. AC will not rest, and neither shall we." As the guests dispersed to their assigned tasks, some to guard the library, others to patrol the halls, Poirot lingered, his eyes fixed on the shattered vase in the hallway. The candlestick, the open window, the timing, it was all too perfect, too theatrical. AC was taunting him, daring him to solve the puzzle before the final act. But Poirot was not one to be outwitted. His little gray cells hummed with purpose, piecing together the clues, the voices, the motives. He returned to the parlor, where Violet sat alone, her face a mask of guilt and fear. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "you have taken the first step toward redemption. But be warned, AC will not forgive your betrayal. Stay close to me and do not stray." Violet nodded, her voice a whisper. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I don't deserve your trust." "Trust is earned, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his eyes twinkling with a hint of warmth. "And you shall have the chance to earn it." As he turned to leave, a shadow flickered at the edge of his vision, a figure, perhaps retreating, into the darkness of the manor's corridors. Poirot's hand tightened on his cane, his resolve unshaken. The betrayer had been unmasked, but the mastermind remained. The game was far from over, and Hercule Poirot was ready for the next move. Chapter 11. The Manuscript's Curse. The air in Ravenwood Manor was thick with tension, the kind that clung to the skin like damp silk. Hercule Poirot stood in the dimly lit library, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of a heavy oak table, his gray eyes sharp as they scanned the room. The events of the past days, the cryptic invitation, the vanishing host, the poisonings, the ghostly apparitions, and the locked-room murder had woven a tapestry of intrigue so dense it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Now the game, orchestrated by the elusive AC, had reached a critical juncture. The priceless manuscript, the heart of the conspiracy Poirot had uncovered in the chapel, was missing, and with it the key to unraveling AC's deadly scheme. The library was a cavern of shadows, its shelves towering to the ceiling, laden with leather-bound tomes and manuscripts that whispered of forgotten secrets. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to embers, casting a faint glow over the guests gathered around Poirot. Their faces were a gallery of emotions. Lillian Harcourt, the flamboyant novelist, clutched her shawl, her eyes darting nervously. Sir Reginald Voss, the retired inspector, stood with arms crossed, his jaw set. Clara, the fragile young woman, clung to Julian Marsh, the poet, whose disheveled appearance belied a newfound alertness. And Dr. Elias Thorne, the literary scholar, adjusted his spectacles, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the others' unease. Poirot had summoned them here after the chapel confrontation, where he had overheard AC's plan to steal the manuscript, said to be worth a fortune not for its monetary value, but for the secrets it held. The manuscript, a lost work attributed to a legendary author, was rumored to contain a coded confession that could ruin reputations, perhaps even topple empires of influence in the literary world. But the thief had struck first, spiriting it away despite Poirot's vigilance. Or so it seemed. "Mies Amos," Poirot began, his voice a measured cadence that commanded attention. "The manuscript is gone, but do not despair. Hercule Poirot does not accept defeat so easily. The thief believes they have outwitted us, but they have made a grave error, one that will lead us to the truth." Lillian's laugh was brittle. "You're saying you let them take it?" "Monsieur Poirot, that's a bold claim, even for you." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "Non, Madame Harcourt, I did not let them take it, but I suspected the manuscript in the display case was a decoy. The real one, I believe, remains hidden in this matter. And I, Poirot, will find it." Sir Reginald snorted. "A decoy? That's a stretch. We all saw the Thing Vellum Page's medieval script, the lot, looked real enough to me. Appearances, Sir Reginald, are the canvas of deception, Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. The thief took what they were meant to take. But the true manuscript, it is elsewhere, protected by a mind as cunning as a sea's own. Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. But what if it's cursed? They say anyone who touches it meets a terrible fate. The last owner disappeared, didn't they? Julian squeezed her hand, his tone sharp. Superstition, Clara, don't. Let it cloud your judgment. Poirot, where do we start looking? Poirot raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. We begin with the journal, the one I found in the hidden library. It contains a riddle, a map of sorts, that points to the manuscripts. True hiding place. But we must act swiftly, for AC will soon realize their prize is false. He produced the coded journal, its pages worn but intact, and opened it to a marked passage. The guests crowded closer, their breath catching as Poirot read aloud. Beneath, the raven's gaze where shadows dance. The truth lies guarded by time's embrace. Dr. Thorne frowned, his scholarly instincts piqued. A poetic clue, but vague. The raven motif is everywhere in this madder tapestries, crests, even the chandelier. It could mean anything. Precisement, Poirot said, his voice low. But the shadows, they are specific. They dance where light and darkness meet. Come, we must explore the manor's heart. He led them from the library, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the marble floor. The group moved through the grand hall, past the tapestry where Poirot had found Essie's taunting note, and into a corridor lined with stained glass windows. The windows depicted scenes of ravens in flight, their wings casting kaleidoscopic shadows that shimmered in the moonlight. Poirot paused, his gaze fixed on one window where a raven's eye seemed to glint unnaturally. Regardus, he said, pointing. This eye, it is not glass. It is a lens designed to catch the light in a particular way. Observe how the shadow falls. The shadow of the raven's eye stretched across the floor, pointing to a stone in the wall that was slightly misaligned. Poirot pressed it, and with a soft groan, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The guests gasped, but Poirot's expression was one of quiet triumph. Mon Dieu, Lillian whispered. How did? You know, the little gray cells, madame, Poirot replied. They see what others overlook. He lit a lantern from a nearby table and led the way down, the air growing colder with each step. The staircase spiraled into a subterranean chamber, its walls carved with intricate reliefs of ravens and quills. At the center stood a stone pedestal, empty but for a faint indentation where something rectangular had rested. The manuscript was here, Poirot said, his voice echoing. But it has been moved recently. See the dust, it is disturbed. Sir Reginald knelt, examining the pedestal. You're right. Someone's been here, and not long ago. But where's it gone? Poirot's eyes scanned the chamber, landing on a series of carvings along the far wall. They formed a pattern, a sequence of ravens in different poses, flying, perched, riding with quills. He approached, his fingers brushing the stone. One carving gave slightly under his touch, revealing a hidden lever. Before he could pull it, a low rumble filled the chamber, and the floor beneath Clara shifted. Look out! Julian shouted, yanking her back as a section of the floor slid open, revealing a pit lined with sharpened spikes. Clara screamed, clinging. To him, all the others froze. A booby trap, Poirot said, his voice calm but steely. Assis anticipated pursuit. But this is no obstacle for Hercule Poirot. He studied the lever, noting its position relative to the carvings. The sequence, he murmured. It is a code. We must align the carvings in the correct order to disable the trap. Dr. Thorne stepped forward, his scholarly mind engaged. Let me help. The journal mentioned time's embrace. Perhaps the carvings represent a timeline: birth, flight, creation. Together, they worked, Poirot directing the group to press the carvings in a specific order. A raven hatching, taking flight, then wielding a quill. With each press, a click echoed, and the pit slowly closed, the spikes retracting. The final carving triggered a hidden door in the wall, revealing a small vault. Inside, on a velvet cushion, lay the true manuscript. Its pages were ancient, the ink faded but legible, bound in leather embossed with the raven and quill crest. Poirot lifted it carefully, his gloved hand steady. "Voila," he said. "The prize Acis sought to control." Lillian's eyes widened. "Is that it? The lost work?" "They say it's a confession, someone powerful admitting to a crime no one could prove." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone guarded. "But its true value lies in what it reveals about Acis' motives. We must guard it closely." As they prepared to leave, a faint hiss filled the chamber. Poirot's head snapped up, his senses alert. "Vite!" he shouted, ushering the group toward the stairs. A noxious gas began seeping from vents in the walls, another of Acis' traps. Poirot grabbed a cloth from his pocket, covering his mouth, and helped Clara, who was coughing violently. Sir Reginald and Julian supported the others, while Dr. Thorne clutched the manuscript, his face pale but determined. They stumbled back into the corridor, the gas dissipating as they reached fresh air. Poirot slammed the hidden door shut, sealing. "The trap. Acis plays a dangerous game," he said, his breath steady despite the ordeal. "But they underestimate Hercule Poirot." The group returned to the library, the manuscript now under Poirot's protection. He placed it in a locked case, but his mind was already racing ahead. The trap suggested Acis was close, perhaps among them, watching their every move. He turned. To the guests, his gaze piercing. "Mes amis, we have won a battle, but the war is not over. The manuscript is safe, but Acis will strike again. We must be vigilant." Clara, still shaken, whispered, "What if they're here, among us?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Mademoiselle, they are. And I, Poirot, will unmask them. But for now, we rest. Tomorrow, we turn the hunter into the hunted." The chapter closed with the guests dispersing to their rooms, the manuscript secured, but the air heavy with suspicion. Poirot remained in the library, his fingers brushing the journal's pages, his little gray cells weaving together the clues. The curse of the manuscript was no superstition. It was Acis' design, a web of deception he was determined to unravel.